When this kid arrived at the Empire's most prestigious academy with his parents to register, they hadn't even reached the door before two noble brats blocked his path, smirking and saying, "Commoners have no place here." Looking to stir up trouble, they shoved his mother so hard she fell to the ground. Lewis nearly snapped on the spot, ready to teach them a lesson. But his parents held him back, telling him to focus on the entrance exam and not waste everything on a fight, so he restrained himself, seeing no reaction. The bullies looked disappointed. They were hoping for an excuse to beat up a commoner for fun, and the chance slipped away. But they didn't know that deep down Lewis had promised himself that once he got into the academy, he would make these nobles pay without a second's hesitation. He headed straight to the exam site where thousands of candidates were already present. Most were older than him, but honestly he didn't care. The headmaster appeared and declared the start of the entrance exam. The first test was climbing a flight of stairs guarded by senior students with the round 1 pass cards placed behind them. And only a total of 1,000 people would pass. It was a first-come, first-served race. Once the cards were gone, it was over. So he started, and all the kids rushed up the stairs, thinking it was a piece of cake. But suddenly, an extremely wicked senior stood up to show everyone what hell was really like. He unleashed a dark, crimson aura that spread across the candidates, terrifying them, and many collapsed as their numbers rang out in mid-air. With the eliminated mark printed bold, those behind them were confused. Not knowing what had just happened, but our kid knew exactly what it was. Amidst the chaos, he stepped up and told everyone. That wasn't an attack. The senior was just releasing his pressure to scare them. Anyone faint of heart or weak-willed would collapse from fear. The senior immediately noticed him, realizing he was different. He had a spine. But there were still many talented people out there, and he didn't want a commoner slipping through. The kid immediately despised this bully. The senior said that if a commoner had made it this far, he would make him feel it. He exploded with even greater, more terrifying pressure. The weak-willed candidates felt pain and fear, but to Louis it was nothing. He stood on the stairs, smirking at the senior, thinking this killing intent was too weak it might scare normal people. But for him, someone who had seen enough of the world's cruelty and trained rigorously, it was negligible. He unleashed his martial arts and rushed up the stairs using his iron will to counter that terrifying pressure. Anger flared because he wanted to show the nobles what real killing intent was. He lunged straight at the senior and threw a punch, making every other candidate gasp in horror. Even the senior was rattled that a commoner could overcome his pressure. But just before making contact, Louis pulled his punch and noticed the senior had broken into a sweat. Everyone gasped in shock that at just 13 to 14 years old, he was already strong enough to not only withstand the killing intent, but also dare to strike back all without using a shred of magic. He didn't care how shocked they were. He walked past the senior, took his pass card, and muttered that he was sick of these games. The senior couldn't swallow that insult. He instantly snapped and threw another punch at Louis, but at the very last moment, Louis blocked it. It left the senior both scared and confused. A commoner had blocked his blow without using magic. Right then, the headmaster intervened, announcing that he was the first to pass the exam. And he reminded them that in the academy, all students are equal, noble, or commoner. They are all human first. Hearing this, the senior bowed his head and Louis gave a slight nod in return. The headmaster approached Louis and congratulated him. Suddenly, he noticed his hair color and said it was quite worrying, but didn't reveal why Louis didn't like this. A sense of wariness rose up. Even so, he remained calm and asked what he meant. But the headmaster cut him off and leaned in closer, saying that if he were accepted, he would personally brew a potion to hide his special trait. He didn't fully understand it, and even suspected the headmaster was testing him or trying to unnerve him. He evaluated himself and decided to let it be for now. After all, he had to worry about the second test, having said that he turned and left the headmaster behind. The noble he had defeated earlier was standing nearby, fuming with rage. This was the first time the headmaster had interfered in an exam like that, and to protect a commoner at that, he swore to avenge the humiliation Louis had caused him. Those who passed the first round were led to the second test site, an indoor arena. Out of 20,000 candidates, only 1,000 remained, and most were nobles trained as elites. Commoners were nearly extinct. As Louis walked behind, someone suddenly bumped into him. It was another bullying noble. He smirked, saying next time no one would be there to help him, and threw in a classic noble insult. Louis remained calm and didn't react. The lackey added that if the headmaster hadn't stepped in earlier, our hero would have been eliminated long ago. This time he retorted by calling the noble an idiot, and said that the headmaster, a grandmaster, had a better eye for talent than these run-of-the-mill nobles. The bully didn't like being talked to that way. He immediately threatened to take Louis down. He just smirked, making the noble even angrier. He swung a fist at his face, but at the very last moment Louis moved. He executed a precise martial arts strike, transmitting a shockwave through the opponent's body. It was a nerve strike technique. a spiral blow that disrupted the flow of energy within the body, sending the noble flying like a stupid parrot. Other bullies rushed to catch their comrade, and the scene quickly drew everyone's gaze. The noble who had just been hit tried to stand up. He realized his arm had gone numb and his whole body was barely responding. Panic was clear on his face as he accused him of using poison and threatened to report him immediately. Lewis calmly called him an idiot, saying he didn't use any poison, just martial arts. In truth, he had been holding back because he promised his mother not to cause trouble, but everything has a limit. Anyone who dared to bully him would meet a similar or even worse fate. He believed in a simple rule. If you dare to hit someone, you must be prepared to be hit back. He raised his fist to strike again, but someone suddenly grabbed his arm. It was the cool-looking blonde youth, Lord Kane. He said they were still in the exam and needed to follow the rules. If Lewis kept fighting, he would be disqualified. Those words snapped him back to reality. He yanked his arm from Kane, shot him an annoyed look, and walked away. Kane turned to the bullies who were screaming and gave them a cold, piercing glare, warning them to shut up and get lost. The bullies instantly fell silent and retreated, though their eyes were still full of hatred. Louis watched Kane carefully, thinking he was just another noble, using his status to control others. But unexpectedly, Kane spoke up, telling him he was strong and brave, and even suggested they team up. Before Louis could answer, a crowd of girls rushed over to Kane, begging to join his team because they admired him. Soon enough, even the boys swarmed around like fanboys. Louis took it all in, but before he had a chance to think, a small whirlwind suddenly appeared in the middle of the arena. Principal Smith appeared within it and announced that the second round of the exam would be a test of strength. Before anyone could react, a strange burning orb appeared on their chests. The candidates looked down, completely bewildered, wondering what was happening. Kane quickly realized it was an Earth attribute ability, and the next second, a terrifying weight crashed down on everyone. Their bodies felt as if they were carrying tons of rock. Many struggled to keep their balance, and even Kane gritted his teeth, bracing himself to stay upright. Then he noticed something shocking. Someone was walking as if nothing was wrong. Kane tried to look up and saw Louis calmly stepping forward, ready for the next challenge, while Principal Smith watched with surprise. But in his eyes, there was also a clear sense of satisfaction. Once again, Louis was the first to step forward, and despite the terrifying pressure and weight, he walked as if nothing was hindering him. Meanwhile, even students who had trained for 3 to 4 years were barely managing to hold on, and the pressure kept increasing over time. Kane could clearly feel his bones groaning, seeing Louis standing there without a single tremor. Especially without any formal training, Kane couldn't understand just how strong he really was. Principal Smith then announced that only those who remained standing could advance to the next round. He waved his hand, conjuring several weapons, and told them that whoever wanted one could choose. Louis calmly walked over and picked out a sturdy sword, while many other candidates were still struggling to stay upright, let alone hold a weapon. And then the next stage began, and there was an unexpected twist. Principal Smith announced the arrival of bound entities. The students looked at each other confused, and before anyone could ask, the principal vanished. Someone screamed for everyone to look up, and as they did, they saw glowing green creatures falling from above, landing all over the arena. They looked soft and bouncy, almost like jelly. At first, they seemed quite harmless, especially compared to the seniors from earlier. The rules were quickly announced: hit a slime for 1 point, dodge one for 2 points, and kill one for 5 points. The ranking would be based on points, and only the top 100 would advance. At first, some students mocked them, thinking the slimes were weak and easy to defeat, so they attacked, thinking it would be simple, but the moment they struck, the slimes turned aggressive. They moved faster and slammed into people with surprising force. Their cute appearance vanished as they attacked wildly. They smashed into one person after another, and panic spread across the arena as slimes filled every corner, turning the battlefield into chaos. Up above, Principal Smith and the senior judges watched closely. One judge reported that many members of great families were participating, including geniuses from the Aranka and Durahan clans, and she also noted a few suspicious individuals, especially the boy who stood at the top of the first round. Principal Smith smiled and said he found him very interesting, although the judge added that for quite a while now, Louis hadn't made a move yet, making them worry he would fall behind, and the other candidates noticed it too. They thought he had given up, but that wasn't the case. Just as a slime was about to attack, Louis stood calmly, turning slightly fully aware of everything around him. When the slime was about to strike, he dodged within 2 seconds, looking as effortless as a game. It made everyone wonder how he moved so easily. A slime flashed with electricity and attacked again, this time much stronger, and several others lunged straight at him. The truth was, Louis hadn't come to this exam empty-handed. Before this, he had trained in extreme conditions, even asking his friends to throw rocks at him. They didn't want to hurt him, but he convinced them because he wanted to test a hypothesis. In his previous life, he had hypothesized that if he trained his mind to transmit information from the parietal lobe to the cerebellum, extremely quickly he could calculate attack trajectories and react instantly. If he continuously calculated the path and reacted in real time, he believed he could handle every attack, so he stood still as rocks flew toward him and activated his combat technique. He calculated the trajectory of every stone and dodged them with pinpoint accuracy. His friends were stunned and ran over to ask what he had just done. Louis said he used a combat method called void combat calculation. They didn't really understand, but for him it proved his hypothesis was correct. Now in the second round, he activated the void combat calculation again. As the slimes lunged at him, he calculated their speed and direction in his head. They were fast and strong, but the key point was that they only moved in straight lines, which made their angles easy to predict. He calmly adjusted his steps, dodging every strike to score 8 points in just a few seconds. Then he drew his sword and used a slashing technique, the blade cutting right through the slimes. Neatly slicing them apart, he scored even more points. Kane watched in total shock, and even the judges glanced at Principal Smith in astonishment. They couldn't believe Louis could predict things so accurately. Kane felt excited. Now he understood that Louis wasn't just some commoner, he was a true warrior with high-level combat skills. Kane wanted to team up with him, especially now, since it would be very beneficial. Another slime lunged, but as he prepared to slash someone, cut in to steal the target. Louis frowned, thinking Kane was stealing his kill, but Kane quickly explained that he wasn't. He wasn't stealing from him, but from someone else, and he then formally introduced himself and suggested they earn points together. Louis hesitated because trust was a luxury here, but he smirked and suggested turning it into a competition to see who could get more points. This piqued his interest, and he agreed on the condition that the loser would have to follow all the winner's demands. He gripped his sword, saying he would show his true strength, and the two stood back to back. Some jealous nobles saw an opportunity to eliminate a commoner while gaining points. One shot an arrow at Louis. He prepared to counterattack, but before anyone understood what was happening, the arrow arrived, and the crowd gasped, thinking he had been hit. But he stood perfectly still. The arrow hadn't pierced him. He had caught all three with his bare hands. The bullies looked on in disbelief, and Kane immediately asked if he was all right. Enraged by their dirty tricks, the archer felt insulted when Kane called him pathetic. He activated a magic skill, notched an arrow, and fired. Kai dodged and sliced most of the arrows in midair, but one slipped through, flying straight at him. Blood sprayed, and Ken froze, thinking he was about to be skewered. He braced for the impact, but nothing happened. When he opened his eyes, he saw Louis standing in front of him, gripping the arrow with his bare hand, blood dripping from his palm as he told Ken to stay calm, because that attack was actually aimed at him from the start. High above, a proctor noted the clear malice behind that move and asked the headmaster if they should disqualify that group. Headmaster Smith calmly replied to just wait, saying they would disqualify themselves soon enough. Furthermore, he wanted to observe them a bit longer before deciding on any disciplinary action. He also ordered recovery potions to be prepared, having a gut feeling that Louis was about to break someone's bones. He asked Kane if he knew what baseball was, but in this world, of course, he didn't. Even so, Louis still wanted to put on a show. A slime lunged at him. He swung his sword like a bat. Lightning crackled along the blade, and he smashed the slime, sending it flying straight into the bullies and slamming into them. One guy took the full force of it, breaking his ribs and flying off the arena, instantly disqualified. He didn't stop rushing toward the others who were still frozen, stunned by how quickly their leader had been taken down. One guy turned around too late. Louis somersaulted over his head and kicked a slime right into his face. The impact crushed and bruised his teeth, knocking him out of the arena for another disqualification. Now only one remained. He was sweating, panicked, and had no idea where the next strike would come from. Suddenly, Louis appeared behind him, teasing him to turn around. But even then, he refused to apologize, continuing to spew insults, claiming his seniors knew better, and that a commoner should know his place, completely unaware that someone was already standing right in front of him. In the very next second, he tripped and rolled out of the arena. The person who sent him face first into the dirt was Ken, and that fall also sent the last bully packing. Ken stepped up to thank Louis, noticing the hand injured from blocking the arrow earlier had already been bandaged. The two exchanged a high five, and Louis admitted that Ken was indeed a rare, decent noble. Both kept running as slimes pursued them. While moving, Ken told Louis not to compare him to the other nobles because he wasn't like them. He explained that there were many great families within the empire, and he belonged to the Oranka family. Great families were bloodlines that had produced many grandmasters and sages, so they held immense power, sometimes rivaling the royal family itself. The nobility and the magic association. These concepts were still new and intriguing to Louis, so he took note of them while continuing to fight, all while the bullies glared at him with My cold, sharp eyes, seeing him fight so well, made them jealous and angry, and they wouldn't accept a commoner taking their points, so they all attacked Lewis and Kane at the same time. Kane's loyal henchmen panicked when they saw their young master being targeted and rushed to protect him. In the blink of an eye, chaos erupted around Lewis and Kane as the contestants who had come to prove themselves now turned to fight each other in a wild free-for-all. The arena turned into a chaotic brawl not far away. Faye observed the situation and found it quite interesting. She called her friend Miliana, suggesting they team up to challenge the other nobles while Lewis continued to dodge slimes using martial arts. But he also realized the students were starting to target each other. He understood that if he kept scoring high, trouble would find him. Just then, he saw Miliana cutting through the nobles like she was slicing vegetables. Faye fought skillfully as well. Beside her was a red-haired teenager named Nugan, who seemed a bit unhinged. He swung his hammer wildly, smashing people away while screaming that hitting people was even more fun than hitting slimes. He caused mayhem across the arena, taking down a series of opponents like he was having a fit. High above, Headmaster Smith and the proctors watched closely. One person suggested stopping the match, worried that too many nobles were being eliminated. But the headmaster disagreed, saying it was fun to watch geniuses clash. Another proctor expressed concern that losing so many noble candidates would cause trouble. The headmaster brushed it off, saying he didn't care about public opinion and just wanted to see the outcome. Then suddenly stepped down into the middle of the arena to end round 2. He announced that scores and rankings would be revealed later. He dispelled the earth element magic effects and handed out recovery potions to everyone. Lewis curiously looked at the bottle. Even a basic one cost 3 silver coins, way too luxurious for him. Kane saw this and asked, then joked that even though he lost the bet, he wouldn't bully him. Not long after, the headmaster announced the rankings, and the nobles rejoiced when they didn't see Louis's name. But in reality, the top 5 had broken records, so they were announced separately. He declared 5th place belonged to Milzana Royce, 4th to Kanaranka, and 3rd to Fedurahan with 887 points. Lewis was in 2nd place. Kane was in complete shock, not just because Lewis outscored him, but because he had never seen a commoner fight like that. Kane accepted his defeat gracefully. When asked what he wanted from Lewis, he just said to leave it for after the exam. Then the headmaster announced 1st place with 888 points, breaking the record. It was the crazy red-haired guy from earlier knew, still laughing just like he was in the fight. People whispered about his terrifying strength, especially since he was also a commoner, but had surpassed even the heir of the Durahan house. Miliana looked worried when she saw Faye, trembling with anger. But Faye quickly restrained herself and said she really wanted to fight someone that strong. Meanwhile, many seniors were furious that the noble freshman had lost to some commoners. A proctor remarked that taking 2nd place was unprecedented since the academy's founding. And ironically, both came from an orphanage. The headmaster explained that the orphanage was run by the Magic Association because true power lies within the masses. It had nothing to do with social status, as many thought. He told those who passed to continue to the next location on the way. Ken told Lewis he almost took 1st place, wondering who was truly stronger, but Lewis didn't care about the answer. Before long, they arrived at the academy's training grounds. Headmaster Smith declared the final round was a survival challenge, a battle royale using badges, and began distributing badges to everyone. The goal for each person was to collect as many badges as possible by any means necessary. Anyone who lost their badge would be eliminated immediately, and only the top 10 would be admitted. Kane looked at his new friend and said it would be better to act separately for now, also reminding him that those with high rankings would be targeted, so he had to be extremely careful. Lewis replied that he would definitely survive, knowing full well that announcing the 2nd round rankings was meant to create exactly this situation. Hearing this, Headmaster Smith just smiled, telling everyone to show their full potential because only the strongest would survive until the end. As the exam started, Louis wandered into the forest, thinking that the door to admission was close, so he had to win no matter what. Suddenly, someone blocked his path. It was an NPC-type noble who lunged at him, screaming that Louis humiliated all the nobles in the previous round. As he turned back, he saw 2 more guys rushing at him. No one was there to protect him, but they didn't know that Lewis didn't need protection. On the contrary, they were the ones who needed insurance. Suddenly, Lewis spotted someone standing on a tree drawing a bow aimed at him and realized his fame had given away his position. So everyone flocked toward him. The bullies started attacking one by one, but he dodged every strike skillfully. Suddenly, he felt an incredibly powerful blow coming his way. He was forced to parry with his sword, but he was confused because he couldn't tell what it was. Right then, another guy rushed in, threatening to kill him, but Lewis wasn't about to give up easily. He took them all on. Then once again, that powerful attack struck and he dodged it again. But this time, he started to get annoyed. It turned out to be some NPCs casting magic arrows mocking him for not using magic. But they got frustrated when he kept dodging while Lewis felt a bit tense. Since he couldn't calculate the magic's trajectory, he had to rely entirely on martial arts. He used the sen no sen technique, striking before the opponent could even make a move. He used their own force against them. Just then the leader ordered everyone to attack at once. The whole mob lunged at him, but this time he was ready. He darted between them, dodging every single blow. Then, using his sword, he deflected their attacks back at them, making them hit each other instead of him. Even when someone fired a magic arrow, Lewis dodged at the last second, causing another guy to take the hit instead. He tossed the wounded guy aside like trash and then used a spear to take down the one in the tree. He took them out one by one. He gathered all their badges, grinning like he'd hit the jackpot. But when one guy shouted to attack again, Kane stepped in, using his bow to knock him down to the ground. Kane sat in the tree, watching leisurely. Realizing Lewis didn't use magic, the group was stunned because Kane wasn't supposed to be there. But Kane said he had already taken care of the others and dug up their attack plan. The bully kept yelling, so Kai tapped his head with the bow until he went silent. Kai jumped down, and Lewis remarked that things were fine now. Kane said the others were just low-level nobles who had just started learning magic, making them easy to deal with. He handed Lewis the last badge he had collected. Then he offered to help, saying it would be a pain if he kept getting targeted. Lewis refused, saying he could handle his own business. Faye witnessed the whole scene and applauded Louis's straightforwardness and aura. But she didn't come to chat. She got straight to the point. She wanted to duel him. Lewis quickly noted that she was the granddaughter of the Grandmaster of the Durahan house. He asked Kane if he had ever fought her. Kane hesitated, denying it awkwardly, but admitted he had sparred with her. He said he was a bit careless at the time. Lewis immediately teased him, implying he had lost, which made Kane scramble to explain. Before the bickering could drag on, Faye cut in, telling the two to stop acting like brothers and quit the flirting. She challenged them to a duel again. Kane warned that she could already use magic at the apprentice's level, which was very high for her age. He advised Louis to skip it and go look for badges. She started mocking them, saying they were planning to run away, claiming Kane was making Lewis lose his confidence because he knew he couldn't win, even calling him a coward. That struck a nerve. Kane was annoyed too, but Lewis stepped forward. His pride awakened. He said he had always wanted to see how a great house fought, so he accepted. Faye smirked, saying she liked that enthusiasm. To be fair, she declared she wouldn't use magic. Without hesitation, she lunged forward and unleashed her secret technique, the Landslam Spear Strike. Aimed straight at him, he didn't move. The spear tip hit him, or at least that's what it looked like. Faye smiled, not because she hit him, but because at the very last moment he had tilted slightly and clamped the spear with his bicep. Faye pulled her weapon back and did a sharp 360-degree spin, forcing him to let go. Then she immediately launched another spear strike. Lewis dodged by a hair's breadth. From afar, the judges watched intently, noting it had been a long time since they had seen the Durahan spear style again. They also praised Faye's speed and strength, calling her a true genius. However, they were also impressed by Lewis and started betting on how long he could hold out. Some guessed he was about to lose. Then they turned to ask the headmaster who would win. The headmaster said bluntly that he liked the new kid, but he couldn't beat Faye. Because fighting is a clash of body and will, and currently he still lacked experience. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, dust was flying everywhere, and inside the cloud, Faye lunged straight at our hero. He started defending, dodging every single attack. Finally, he found an opening and counterattacked, making her almost drop her spear. This annoyed her, and our hero vaulted over her head, landed behind her, and remarked that he couldn't believe she had dodged everything. Even Khan from the Aranka family couldn't have done that, but Lewis didn't find it hard. He just observed everything carefully, and everything was easy. Faye took the lead herself, and with a challenge unleashed her secret spear technique, Falling Moon Spear, aimed at Lewis. He immediately analyzed the attack, thinking that spear techniques, which include threatening sweeps, defensive maneuvers, and suppression combined with long range, were quite a hassle. Having just encountered a bit of difficulty, he also realized a few weaknesses in using a spear. For example, it's easily countered in close combat. All he needed to do was find the right moment to close the distance. Faye attacked, and when he saw an opening, he struck back, but Faye dodged instantly and lunged at him. She declared that her family's spear style had no weaknesses and created a tornado with her weapon. The judges remarked that Faye was truly gifted. Even the Grandmaster of the Durahan house had learned this move. At 56 years old, combining magic with spear skills, Faye was far ahead of her peers. The boys seemed to have lost for the moment, but in reality our hero still had a few tricks up his sleeve. He used a sword net technique. Another weakness of the spear is that it consumes a lot of stamina. If he defended accurately, she would eventually reveal an opening. But he didn't realize that his own sword was cracking. Faye was frustrated that Lewis was still holding on. Finally, he found an opening and struck at Faye. But at that exact moment, his sword snapped, leaving everyone stunned. Faye even complimented him, saying it was impressive, because if the sword hadn't broken, he would have successfully countered her. As for Lewis, he just felt unlucky. Faye perhaps realized that Louis was holding back, but he apologized, saying it was a bad habit because he liked to observe before going all out. Now that he was done observing, it was time to get serious. Faye thought they couldn't continue because his weapon was broken, but Louis was ready. He was even better at bare-handed combat. He prepared for the next step. Faye attacked our hero with a spinning strike. Kane warned that if Louis blocked it head-on, he would be seriously injured, but our hero was completely focused on martial arts, blocking Faye's spear tip. At the very last moment with his bare hands. The judges from afar were confused because Faye's strike was supposed to have a defense penetration effect, yet nothing happened. They didn't understand what he had done to block it so easily. Headmaster Smith was both amazed and speechless, but Faye didn't stop. She used her leg to knock his hand away, reclaiming her spear, and continued to rush at him this time, unleashing an even stronger attack. Attacked from all sides at once. Lewis enters a state of slowed-down focus, casually batting away every strike with just his bare hands, leaving Faye confused and Principal Smith stunned. Smith is shocked to realize the boy is countering the Durahan family's signature spinning spear technique, a legendary secret art, using a method never seen before. Since his moves are being blocked like this, he's truly a monster. Our hero counterattacks, forcing Faye to retreat, which makes her furious and leads her to demand an explanation for that bizarre technique. He answers honestly that it's just a part of his martial arts style, adding a twist at the exact moment of impact to negate the spear's rotational force. Even after his explanation, Faye is still completely lost. After speaking, he moves toward her, saying he'll demonstrate with his actions. He starts moving continuously while Faye tries to keep up an attack. From a distance, it looks like he's just an illusion, because Lewis moves like a butterfly in flight. Faye feels like he's right in front of her, but every time she strikes, he's already shifted positions, looking as if he's literally flying. Meanwhile, our hero is determined to show off his own style. This technique is called the butterfly step, agile, fluid footwork, inspired by a legendary martial artist characterized by quick movements and an unpredictable rhythm. It's perfect for fighting Faye. Finally, he spots an opening and attacks, landing a punch that sends her flying backward. Watching from afar, Ken can't believe his eyes, and even Principal Smith is stunned that Lewis could deal such heavy damage to Faye. The judges remark that even without using magic, very few people could beat Faye in close-quarters combat. Perhaps this kid really is a genius. But Faye is enraged because she hasn't lost yet. She stands up, declaring that she comes from a great family with an indomitable fighting spirit and won't go down that easily. She tosses her spear aside. This leaves Lewis dumbfounded as they now switch entirely to hand-to-hand combat. Faye lunges at him, and our hero uses martial arts techniques like Wing Chun and palm strikes to defend against her crushing punches. Even so, his defense isn't perfect, and Faye still manages to injure his arm. Instead of getting angry, he just smiles and shakes off the pain. Faye reminds him that her family wasn't built on weakness. She unleashes a level 3 crushing strike, but this time our hero is ready. He switches to boxing. As they exchange fierce blows, Lewis feels a surge of excitement, and something dark within him begins to awaken. He isn't fighting out of violence, but because he loves unleashing his full strength. His intensity heightens as he steps straight toward Faye, radiating a killing intent that makes her freeze for a moment. She tries to block with her arms, but it's not enough. Lewis lands a blow that knocks her flying into a nearby tree. Principal Smith watches this move and feels like something is very wrong. The remaining students watching the match cannot believe a commoner could have such power. Suddenly, one of them feels nauseous and begins to tremble, recognizing that sensation. It's the overwhelming killing intent radiating from our hero, the same feeling from the bullies who plotted against him earlier. And now they are furious because no one expected a commoner to be this strong. The other guy who just threw up a while ago feels his stomach churn, thinking they have to deal with our hero immediately. If the legends are true, he cannot be allowed to live. From afar, they watch Louis like a madman charging toward Faye, who is already injured and exhausted. She manages to defend just before Lewis lands another punch. She gets blown away again. He lunges at her while she's still on the ground. Clearly, his power and speed are on a completely different level, and she has no chance of winning in this state. He prepares to strike, and at the last second, fearing for her life, she uses a forbidden martial arts technique to protect herself and counterattack. The impact sends them both flying away. Suddenly, our hero returns to his normal calm state. He looks down at his injured hands, quietly reflecting on the power of magic. Ken runs over to ask if he's okay. He replies that he's fine, just unsure about how Faye is doing. Just then, the bullies hiding behind the tree step out and accuse him of losing his badge, declaring he's disqualified from the exam. Lewis looks down and realizes his badge has been burned to ash. Ken immediately steps in to protect him, insisting it was just an accident. The bully smirks, saying the principal saw everything today. Ken can't help a commoner who cheated. He steps forward, telling him to drop everything and leave because he's ruining the exam, even calling him trash and telling him to disappear. But suddenly, Faye tells them to stop. Everyone turns to look at her. Louis is astonished to see her standing despite being so heavily injured. The bully asks if she really intends to protect a commoner, warning that she'll be disqualified for breaking the rules. Faye doesn't care, admitting our hero deserves the points, and that she was the one who accidentally used magic. She apologizes. Ken can't believe his ears. The arrogant Faye is actually apologizing. Lewis also apologizes, saying he was the one who lost control first. So he is the one who should be saying sorry. Faye accepts the apology, though she's still annoyed at losing. She says he forced her to use magic, but she still wants a rematch before the official enrollment. A bully laughs loudly, mentioning that he has 4 badges and Lewis is unlikely to pass, but right after that, Faye tears a piece of fabric from her outfit and hands it to Lewis. It represents the 14 badges she collected. In an instant, our hero surpasses the bullies. Before leaving, she teases Ken and tells the others that the weak shouldn't pass and the deserving shouldn't fail. She doesn't accept attacks like that. Then she raises her spear, reminding them that only 10 people can pass. Her new goal is to collect over 14 badges to secure his spot. He smiles, saying he was thinking the same thing. The two rush back into the competition, determined to gather more badges, get into the academy, and settle their silly bet. Our hero watches his 2 new allies leave. He smiles faintly, not noticing that Principal Smith and a judge have descended from the sky to talk to him. The principal approaches and remains calm. He explains that since the badge was incinerated, he is disqualified and will be taken outside. Lewis accepts this without a word of protest while the bully clenches his fists, muttering that this isn't over yet. He turns to his friend, saying he never wants to see Lewis's face again, but his friend reminds him that if Faye and the others defeat enough opponents, Lewis might still have a chance to pass. However, this guy's judgment is clouded by hatred. He begins to imagine that if a contestant were to accidentally die during the exam, it wouldn't be anything strange. Especially if it were just a commoner, no one would care. His friend stays silently encouraging the thought, recalling that terrifying aura from the hero earlier. He was convinced that what the boy carried within wasn't normal, but a deep, hidden darkness. Meanwhile, our hero handed over the collected badges to the examiner, thinking that while his martial arts were strong, they were nothing compared to magic. He looked toward the academy, reflecting on how much he truly wanted to get in, to learn how to combine martial arts and magic, but at the moment it seemed quite difficult. That evening he left. Worried about his torn, dirty clothes, he thought about how much his mother would worry. He was torn between telling the truth or lying, not realizing a hooded figure had just passed by, and the very next second, while Lewis was lost in thought, a hooded ninja suddenly launched a sneak attack from behind. Lewis reacted with lightning speed, kicking the attacker away. A ninja asked how he had noticed, but Lewis said he could smell the blood from afar, especially the killing intent. Suddenly another appeared, mocking our hero for being too calm for someone about to die. Our hero realized this group was quite professional, so he had to go all out, especially against the one watching from afar who looked extremely dangerous. At that moment, the first ninja lunged to stab him, but once again, Louis dodged every strike. He disarmed the attacker, snatching the dagger from his hand and sending him sprawling. The ninja tried to land a kick with technique, but failed as well. Then they jumped back to regroup. He remarked that Lewis's superhuman senses and advanced combat skills perfectly matched the intel they had received. This made Lewis curious about what that intel was, and the ninja admitted his close-quarters combat was impressive even for an apprentice, but still no match for magic. With that, the ninjas formed a formation and attacked with crossbows combined with wind magic. Lewis was caught off guard and nearly died as the arrows pierced the trees behind him. This was the very type of wind arrow that had been used to ambush him before. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he used a breathing technique to channel his inner energy, boosting his strength and triggering his hidden potential. Afterward, he exploded with power and speed, lunging toward the ninjas. As they fired another round of magic attacks, he dodged so fast the ninjas couldn't even see Lewis move. He danced and rolled through the rain of arrows. Our hero was in the zone until a ninja suddenly blocked his strike, causing his hand to sting with pain. Only then did he realize the ninja he had sensed earlier was truly strong, perhaps even terrifying. He looked around and saw he was completely surrounded by assassins, and now he had no choice but to hold his ground. He tried, but eventually he was hit by several magic arrows, causing Louis to collapse. The ninjas breathed a sigh of relief, having finally taken him down, because even just shooting at him had left them exhausted. However, they were surprised because even though he was just a civilian, he was harder to handle than a normal apprentice. One approached, not knowing that Louis was faking unconsciousness. Louis suddenly opened his eyes and unleashed hell, driving his fingers into the ninja's throat and throwing him away. The leader couldn't believe Louis used such an old-school, feigned death trick to bait them, but had to acknowledge the shocking calmness of such a young man. Louis pointed his crossbow at him, asking why. He didn't care that his subordinate died right in front of him. The leader coldly replied that he didn't care about the lives of trash. Louis fired an arrow, but the leader swatted it away without a second thought. He used magic to create a giant hammer, saying that if not for the mysterious person's orders, he would have wanted to take Louis as his disciple. Then he swung the hammer at Louis. Louis blocked it at the very last moment, but was still sent flying. While Louis was still in the air, the leader flew up after him and once again slammed his magic hammer down on him brutally, declaring while attacking that Louis's ability exceeded that of an apprentice. But in the end, he was still just a rookie, no match for a master like him. When Louis lay on the ground, the assassin lunged but suddenly felt something was wrong. As the dust settled, he saw Louis had taken a defensive stance. This sight shocked him, as the boy was still alive. Louis had survived thanks to his willpower and nerves of steel. He refused to die here. But the ninja was determined to finish him off. He created a giant rock block like a coffin, a magic martial art called Heaven's Cage, and hurled it at Louis. Terrified, Louis thought of his family and his precious life. He thought about mastering magic to protect his loved ones and changing his fate at any cost. As these thoughts surged, something deep inside him changed. His aura began to shift. The wild energy that had appeared earlier rose up again. Instead of defending, Louis chose to attack, forcing himself to believe he would survive. His giant fist collided with the ninja's hammer, leaving the assassin terrified by that monstrous power. A massive explosion erupted from the impact, and when the smoke cleared, Louis was on the ground, coughing violently. However, the ninja hadn't stopped. He felt strange, as if he were fighting an equal opponent. When Louis revealed his true power, the ninja finally understood why the mysterious person had hired him to kill the boy. Still, he pressed forward to approach. Louis raised his hammer, preparing to deliver the final blow. But at the last moment, a lightning storm struck, causing him to miss his strike and stumble back. He realized he was surrounded by swirling bolts of lightning, confused as to what was happening until he was swallowed by them, leaving him severely injured. Louis lay on the ground, looking at everything in confusion. When he saw Principal Smith descending from the sky, he was alert, but above all astonished. Principal Smith was delighted to see Louis, satisfied that he had suppressed his berserk state. He gave him a recovery potion, and Louis drank it very elegantly. Finally, after a moment, the storm stopped tormenting the ninja assassin, and he collapsed to the ground. Principal Smith stepped forward to demand who had the audacity to attack an academy candidate. The ninja suddenly became respectful, admitting that even a grandmaster could not control a monster like Louis, because this attack was merely the prelude to the fate awaiting him. Suddenly, the ninja exploded right in front of the two, leaving the principal unable to understand what had happened. He guessed this might be a tactic of the assassin guild that had placed a bounty on Louis's head. Even so, he hoped he was just overthinking it. Meanwhile, Louis stood up amazed that he had fully recovered thanks to the high-grade medicine. He was beaming, realizing even his bones were healed. He asked why. The principal kept appearing to save him whenever he was in danger, but he replied he would answer that at home. Right at that moment, Louis suddenly remembered something important and panicked. He was past curfew and his mother must be worried sick. He raced home even faster than when he was fighting the bad guys, while Principal Smith, summoning a snake-like magical entity named Skylar, I ordered it to clean up the scene before taking off after Louis near the orphanage in Mantia, a town in the northern reaches of the Canthia Empire. Two thugs were harassing Lacella, demanding to know how much tax money she'd hidden and trying to scam her. When she insisted the money was for the children, they insulted her, their thick-skinned insolence truly beyond redemption. Just as one thug reached for Lacella, someone kicked him, sending teeth and blood flying everywhere. It was Louis, back just in time to save his mother. Lacella was moved to tears, but then she noticed his torn clothes, panicked, and before she could even ask, she rushed over to her son, demanding to know why his clothes were shredded, stained with blood, and his face bandaged. Embarrassed, Lewis brushed it off, claiming he'd just snagged himself on a tree during the exam. She didn't buy it. Meanwhile, the thug who got kicked regained consciousness, turned to Lewis, and accused him of breaking the rules, threatening to call in reinforcements. Just then, Headmaster Smith appeared to intervene. Explaining it was all a misunderstanding, the headmaster introduced himself. Upon realizing he was a grandmaster, the thugs turned pale with fear. He gently asked them to pass along his regards to their lord. The two thugs immediately got the hint and bolted. The headmaster turned to Lasela, saying he needed to discuss something regarding Lewis. She invited them inside, and he noticed something peculiar that the nobles had just mentioned. Automated devices completely devoid of magic. Observing closely, he saw them everywhere from the ceilings to the floors. Lasela happily remarked that she didn't know how Lewis did it, but it made life so much easier. She assumed the headmaster had come in person because Lewis had achieved something major in the exam. But he found that laughable because in reality Lewis had far exceeded all expectations. He was stunned by a talent he had only ever seen mentioned once in the Gaia classics, back when humanity was ruled by monsters. Only one genius had ever appeared guided by the goddess. That person grasped the very essence of elemental creation and martial magic, and after 5 years fought alongside his comrades to defeat the monsters. Saving humanity from extinction, that day of victory became the foundation of the calendar, known as the Liberation Day. In the Gaia records, that individual was called the First Hero. Lasela gazed in awe. Lewis, however, wondered why folklore didn't mention it. The headmaster explained that in other classics, the hero appeared in different guises, but they all described him as having black hair and black eyes. Hearing this, Lasela fell silent instinctively, trying to shield Lewis, and the boy was shocked by her reaction. The headmaster added that this was a secret known only to the upper echelons. Even though he saved humanity, that hero was consumed by the madness in his heart, and he began to kill. He even murdered his own comrades, an unforgivable sin. Because he succumbed to madness, he was erased from history, and that madness became a warning. Hearing this, Lewis looked down at his own hands. Remembering the times he'd almost lost control, the headmaster stood up, his voice grave, stating that in every nation, anyone with black hair and black eyes was executed immediately to prevent the threat from resurfacing. He turned to Lewis, asking if he really thought simple hair dye could fool everyone. His mother, Lasela, stepped forward to take responsibility, saying it was her who told him to dye it, not to hide it. But because she feared something terrible might happen, and she guaranteed that Louis was a good boy. Louis told her to stay calm, saying that if the headmaster had wanted to kill him, he would have done it already. He had come here for a reason. The headmaster smiled, impressed that a 13-year-old could resist and control the madness within, seeing in him the potential of a new hero. Hearing that, Lewis couldn't help but reflect on being viewed as a new hero. The headmaster explained that the world might look peaceful, but that was just the surface. A massive darkness was always lurking in the shadows. While observing him during the exam, he had once thought the legends were just nonsense, but then he decided to personally mentor him. Lewis, for the sake of humanity's future. He tossed an apple toward Lewis, and the boy instinctively caught it without any difficulty. Headmaster Smith added that thanks to Faye and Ken. Turning everything upside down, most applicants had failed the final round, which meant Lewis had passed. He officially welcomed him to the academy and offered to tutor him personally. Lewis was stunned. A grandmaster was placing his trust in him, then asked if he would go insane like the legendary hero. Before he could even finish, the headmaster snatched the apple back from his hand and coldly told him that if that were to happen, he would take care of him personally. The next day, Lewis was helping his younger foster brother build a fence, and his brother couldn't believe it. The fact that the headmaster had personally invited him, he kept babbling about what a huge honor it was, while Lewis knew it wasn't that simple. Yesterday, there was clearly a warning involved, but he didn't mention it to avoid worrying his brother. Meanwhile, his brother kept talking about tuition, uniforms, dorms, and such, but Lewis couldn't stop thinking about the first hero, and the connection between himself and that figure. Even though he was just a regular noble, he remembered how easily the headmaster had caught him, discovered the hair dye trick, and the threat he had made. Lewis wondered how much he could really trust him. The evening before, while walking beside the headmaster, Lewis had asked why he let his mother hear everything, knowing she would worry. He replied that she needed to know the truth or she would become a burden on his path. Lewis was annoyed by the word burden, but Headmaster Sirius warned that once his true identity was exposed, his entire family could be in danger. As a mother, she had to understand and become stronger so he could face the real challenges which had only just begun. With that, he flew off. Lewis reflected and realized he was right. He needed to get stronger for everyone's sake. Soon after, the children ran over to Lewis, laughing and playing happily. A little girl named Lana hugged him tightly, sobbing, asking if he would ever come back to visit. Lewis reassured her, promising to return often, and even bring some of them over to play during the long holidays. After all, this was his home. They pinky promised, and Lewis cherished that vow. Suddenly, someone called his name. A noble butler appeared, saying he served the Oranka family, and young Master Ken wanted to invite Lewis to their estate. He handed over a formal invitation. It looked very official, proving Ken wanted to get closer before school started. Excited, Lewis accepted and stepped into the carriage in Hazan Town in the Kandria Empire. Lewis stepped out of the carriage as the butler bowed. This was the prestigious Oranka family, and even in town their wealth was obvious. Lewis was overwhelmed by the massive estate. His jaw dropped, realizing Ken was truly the kid from a rich family. As he prepared to go inside, someone called his name. Ken ran over full of excitement. He almost hugged Lewis, saying they were about to become classmates. Lewis congratulated Ken for shaking up the final exam and thanked him, saying he only passed because of Faye and Ken. He suggested calling it even on the bet since they were both okay, but Ken said that was a different story. They still had to keep betting. Moreover, Lewis was talented enough to pass and even got recognized by Faye. That was rare. When they entered the house, the maids bowed to Ken and Lewis. Ken said that since they hadn't had a chance to spar for real during the exam, he wanted to have a friendly match before school started. He also said he could help Lewis learn about the academy and math. Lewis thought that sounded like a good idea, but they were interrupted. It was Ken's mother, standing on the stairs, clearly unhappy about who her son had brought along. Ken tried to protect Lewis, saying he was his friend, but before he could explain, his mother shot a glance with high damage, leaving Ken stunned into silence. She walked down, throwing insults at Lewis, saying she always told Ken to choose his friends wisely and that the gates of the Oranka estate weren't for just anyone to walk through. A commoner like Lewis isn't fit to be Ken's friend. It's a disgrace to the family. She told Lewis he should focus on training to get stronger instead of hanging around with the poor. Ken was incredibly embarrassed that Lewis had to hear that directly. Before he could answer, she stepped closer, asking what his motive was for approaching her son. She sarcastically asked if he was after money or power. She then took out a ring, saying it was worth a pile of gold enough to keep him living comfortably for life. She tossed it at his feet with contempt, telling him to pick it up and get lost. Seeing this, Kane couldn't take it anymore and told his mother to stop. He apologized to Lewis, but then seeing Louis bend down to pick up the ring, Louis said he became friends with Kane because he saw his true potential, and if his mother thought that talent was so worthless, then she should be ashamed for looking down on her own son. Ken couldn't believe Lewis had such a killer comeback. His mother was furious and screamed at the servants to throw Lewis out. The servants lunged to grab him, but Ken tried to block them, insisting that Lewis was even more talented than himself. He reminded her that Lewis had broken 6 exam records and even defeated Faye. But his mother didn't believe it. She thought a commoner surpassing the descendants of a noble family was both strange and impossible. She mocked Kane, asking if he really thought those ridiculous lies could fool her. Kane insisted he wasn't lying, and Lewis chimed in, saying that if he were around, Kane would be even stronger. This set Kane's mother off. She couldn't believe a commoner dared to open his mouth in front of her. Her voice echoed throughout the hall, but just then the doors flew open. A mysterious figure walked into the palace. The man called out Louis's name directly and asked, "Is it true you just said that if you were here, Ken would be stronger?" Everyone turned to look. Ken's mother turned pale when she saw her husband, the head of the Oranka house, standing there. She stammered out, "Mr. William," and hurried over, saying they should leave and that Louis would never be able to keep up. But William brushed her aside and turned to his son, and Louis bowed in greeting. Louis also respectfully greeted him, sensing that the Grandmaster William had an aura as terrifying as Headmaster Smith. However, William ignored Louis's words and turned to his son, asking if what the boy said was true. Kane confirmed that Louis's ability surpassed his own. William immediately wanted to test it, demanding that Louis prove it. He unleashed a crazed aura filled with such dense bloodlust that Louis felt like he was suffocating. It felt like a lion was staring directly into his soul, ready to tear it apart. He felt like William wanted to kill him, but at the very last moment, a miracle happened. Louis felt his entire body being ripped apart, but luckily he fought back against William's will with his own aura. The hidden power surprised everyone. He never expected a Grandmaster to be this terrifying. However, thanks to years of constant monster hunting, he had accumulated enough ability to resist strong killing intent. If this was just the opener, there was definitely more to come. Thinking this, Louis gathered his aura. Then he released it from his body with such force that William was slightly startled. In William's eyes, Louis now looked like a fearsome dragon standing before his lion. The lion and the dragon faced off until they finally collided. Cain couldn't believe the power his friend was showing. In the end, Lewis withstood the confrontation but was exhausted, so he bowed before William. Ken hurried over to ask if he was okay, but Lewis just laughed it off. This moment made William start looking at him more seriously. He asked why he was chasing strength. Lewis replied bluntly that he wanted to protect his family. Without another word, William turned and left. As he walked away, he told his son that his willpower was too weak and that he needed to learn from Lewis. Hearing that, Ken's mother couldn't believe it and hurried after him to beg him to change his mind, but William ignored her completely. Seeing his mother so afraid of her husband like that, Cain felt a bit of pity but quickly brushed it aside. He turned to Lewis and said they should head to the training grounds and get started. At the practice field, Cain apologized for his mother's behavior and the whole ordeal with his parents, but Lewis waved it off. He just said Cain's father was a bit extreme, because actually the two of them weren't that far apart, so he shouldn't worry. But Cain said that was the reality of being the child of someone high-ranking. His father was a man who valued results above all else. To get recognized, he had to be stronger. At this rate, Lewis was more like an Aranka child than he was. Lewis tried to explain that William testing him was because of Cain. Perhaps that was his way of showing affection. But for Cain, it wasn't enough. Looking up at the sky, he thought about how the relationship between him and his father was always different. Looking back on his life, he realized he had almost never left this house since he was little because it was only training, eating, and sleeping. The training started when he was even smaller than the monsters he had to fight. His father wanted him to become a great sage like his grandfather, for reasons he didn't understand. He only knew how to swing his sword over and over again because he wanted his father's approval. But in the end, this place was always like a prison. He saw other children playing with paper airplanes happily, while he had to swing his sword and fight battles he didn't understand. Sometimes it felt like even breathing required permission from the guards. The adults around all praised him as the young master, but to him it was like a shackle tightening around his neck. The tighter it got, the more he wanted to struggle. He wanted to sing and fly freely like a bird across the continent, but unfortunately that dream probably belonged to another life. In this life, he was too weak to resist his father, let alone challenge him. So for now, he could only follow his father's expectations and get stronger by swinging his sword because that was the only way he believed he could break those shackles even more. His father also studied at the academy he was about to enter. Cain wanted to get in there, become stronger, and finally win the freedom to live as he pleased, saying that he drew his sword and pointed it at Lewis. He said he was counting on him to help him become the strongest, and Louis accepted immediately. Elsewhere, William stood from afar observing the match between Cain and Louis, and asked his butler about the investigation he had assigned earlier. The butler reported that Lewis was definitely not an ordinary teenager, because according to intelligence during the exam, he had used mysterious fighting techniques no one had ever seen before. Not only did he break 6 records, but he was also the one who defeated Faye without using magic, while Faye himself had used it. Furthermore, he was highly regarded by the headmaster, and even heard that last night he went solo, against an assassin guild, to protect someone. Hearing that, William understood that Lewis wasn't just a handful, but a bona fide troublemaker. Just then, the butler asked if he already knew about this, and why he allowed him to be friends with Cain. But William had his own calculations. He knew troublemakers often attracted danger, and when people face challenges, they will overcome them and grow stronger. Therefore, he believed Cain would become stronger thanks to the experiences he had while being around Lewis. As he spoke to the butler down on the field, Louis was pinning Cain in close combat, until Cain drew his sword and told Lewis to go all out. Watching from afar, William silently judged that his son had a better eye for talent than he'd thought. Cain lunged forward using the Gale Strike martial art, but at the very last moment, Lewis didn't just parry it. He landed a punch right in front of Cain's face so fast that Cain hadn't even realized he'd been countered until Louis's fingertips brushed his face. Lewis remarked that while using magic for speed boosts was fine, Cain's movements were too linear and predictable. Cain couldn't believe he'd been countered so easily despite using magic. Only then did he understand how Louis had defeated Faye. But Louis was lost in thought, and when Cain asked what was wrong, Lewis asked if he'd ever felt something strange. In his fighting style, Cain said he didn't remember anything special because it was the Aranka family's secret technique perfected by both his father and grandfather, and it was very powerful. But Lewis said that wasn't what he meant. He suggested that Cain might have a different path, one distinct from his father and grandfather. Cain was slightly shocked. Lewis lowered his sword, grabbed a dagger from the weapon rack, and turned to ask Cain if he wanted to surprise his father. At that same moment, William realized what was happening as both Kane and Lewis suddenly jumped and lunged straight toward him without warning. A few minutes earlier, Lewis had been teaching Kane some combat techniques. Lewis had told him that speed is everything, the ultimate weapon. Not just movement speed, but also reflexes and split-second decisions. He remembered how Kane fought during the second entrance exam. He noted that Kane's natural speed combined well with his magic-enhanced cognition, but the stabbing technique was difficult to master, and just because his grandfather was good at it didn't mean he had to follow the same path. So Lewis gave him a pair of daggers, explaining that Kane's father never reached the Grandmaster level because he limited himself by copying the old style, but Kane didn't have to repeat that mistake. To fully realize his potential, he had to change his fighting style. Louis asked if he was ready, and Kane loved the idea. He said Lewis was nothing like other nobles, and that he was willing to do anything to be free, including learning new techniques. The two laughed, even sharing a cigarette as they planned. They were going to ambush Kane's father to prove their ability and resolve, and so they both charged at William, with Kane using wind magic to boost his speed as they rushed forward. The butler was confused as to why William wasn't reacting, but William just told him to be silent. As Kane was about to reach his father, William calmly blocked and dodged the attack. He did the same to Lewis. Lewis attacked repeatedly, thinking that daggers were the fastest and most flexible weapons, so he wanted to fully exploit that advantage. Combining his skills with the butterfly footwork, he tried to overwhelm his opponent's reflexes to deal maximum damage in the shortest time. William was slightly surprised to see Lewis using the butterfly footwork, but he quickly defended and dodged every blow. Meanwhile, Kane used wind magic to leap into the air and attack from a different angle. He felt his body becoming lighter, using the daggers. Almost like a bird in flight, he didn't just love his new weapon. He was addicted to the feeling of combining daggers, martial arts, and wind magic, creating both power and excitement as he fought. He even shouted that he had finally found his own martial path. But William thought the performance had gone on long enough. He unleashed an aura that blew both Kane and Lewis away. He was extremely angry that Kane had abandoned the family secret technique just to prove a point, and scolded him for being naive. Kane and Lewis quickly regained their balance and prepared to attack again, combining speed boosts and Louis's quickness. But with just a flick of his hand, Kane's father stopped the daggers before they even touched him. He pushed Kane back and called his own son a coward. As he lunged, Kane remembered Lewis's words: retreating isn't weakness, it's a tactic. You have to do it when necessary. He decided to pull back for a beat and then counterattack. After regaining his footing, he lunged straight at his father again. Just as William tried to grab him, Kane used wind magic to spin like a small tornado. He flipped over William's head and attacked from behind while Lewis also closed in, both prepared to strike. Kane remembered a strange but useful move Lewis had taught him minutes ago. It was something learned from baseball called a change-up, a technique meant to deceive the opponent by suddenly changing speed and rhythm. With this technique, even a simple movement could become lethal if used correctly. If the opponent was just a split second slow to react, they would be overwhelmed once the dagger speed was pushed to the max. And that was exactly what the two of them were doing now. But William was still ready to handle it. He blocked Kane's attack, thinking it was just a meaningless low blow, but at the last second, thanks to his speed, Kane tricked him, leaving the weapon just a few centimeters from William. He was genuinely surprised by his son's maneuver. Meanwhile, Lewis felt proud of his friend and prepared to attack again, but William suddenly declared that the fun was over. He turned to Kane, who was sweating, and started to walk away. He told him not to bring shame to the Aranca family. Kane thought that was enough because his father hadn't flat-out opposed the use of daggers. As William left, the butler followed him, thinking about the close-quarters combo style. Fighting with daggers combined with quick retreats, an interesting ability. For a grandmaster like him to learn from the kids was truly rare. Deep down, he felt proud of his son, even if he didn't say it. Lewis felt it was a rare opportunity to spar with a grandmaster, though it ended a bit too soon. Kane was incredibly happy because for the first time his father had acknowledged him. This was the best feeling of his life, so he wanted to give Lewis a gift. He led Lewis to the Aranca family library. Lewis was stunned by the massive amount of books. When he turned back, Kane was holding a box, handed it to him, and said that without Louis, he wouldn't have found his path so quickly. When Louis opened it, he saw gold and many valuable items, including rare magic books that commoners rarely had access to. Learning from them would surely be a huge help. Lewis picked one up to read. The title was Academy Curriculum, divided by year. The content included basic magical theory, elemental research, and even sections for both magic and martial arts, Kane explained. Every new student had to undergo a magic awakening ritual. Louis didn't know what that was, so Cain said it was a ritual to sense the elements through the goddess statue, Gaia. He used to do it at the temple, and even the great families had to pay 10 gold coins. Louis was shocked, because the price was so high, 10 gold coins was equivalent to the living expenses of an orphanage for several years. He hurriedly asked if you had to pay at the academy, but Cain said it was free there, which is why many people tried so hard to get in. However, there were still many other costs, like living expenses, books, and expensive rent, so Cain gave him this gift and told Louis to just accept it. "If you're short on cash, just come find me," Cain said, practically shoving a box into Louis's hands before he could even refuse telling him to consider it, even for that bet. Louis got the message, and finally agreed. At the same time, he realized he needed a way to make money. He'd heard that magic pharmacists were making a killing lately, so he wondered if there were any books on that around here. Suddenly, an idea struck him if he used knowledge from his past life to invent something he could make a fortune. He asked if the Aranka family had any ties to merchant guilds. Kai said they did, and asked why he was interested. Louis just smiled, saying it was a secret for now, but Kai would find out sooner or later. A week later, the academy's entrance ceremony took place. Every freshman was on their best behavior. Louis walked in happy that the day had finally arrived. As he passed a beautiful upperclassman, she caught a whiff of his scent. He was wearing a very trendy perfume. Seeing the price tag, she knew his family had to be at least Counts, so she decided to make a connection. She ran over, introduced herself as Rose from Class 150, and offered to give him a tour. Louis thought that sounded reasonable, so he introduced himself. Rose had never heard of the Grill family, but the name sounded dangerous, which only piqued her interest further. She guessed he might be an illegitimate child of nobility. As the two of them walked together, Louis explained that in the last few years, ever since the Imperial Garden faction took control, conflict between the royals and the nobles at the academy had been constant. It looked peaceful on the outside, but inside students were constantly fighting for academic resources. Average students could advance if they passed their subjects and earned enough points, but anyone targeted or failing would be expelled. Rose pointed at Louis, warning him that someone was watching him, so he had to be careful. She asked about his family background, but Louis didn't know how to answer. Partly because she was standing so close, someone suddenly pulled her arm away. It was Brian who congratulated Louis on being the commoner who broke the entrance exam record. Louis politely greeted him back. Rose realized she'd just wasted her time with a commoner, even if his perfume did smell expensive. Louis didn't care either way and turned back to Brian, who told him not to pay her any mind. He explained that the academy was like a miniature version of the Empire where all kinds of people gathered. Ken called out to Louis, and as Brian headed to another group, he told Louis to call him if he ever needed anything. Louis wondered why Brian slipped away just as Cain arrived. Cain explained that Brian was the son of the headmaster and wasn't close to him. Faye interjected, calling Brian a good person but saying he had a weak will. Seeing Faye, Ken immediately bristled and started arguing with her while Miliana Faye's gentle friend tried to drag her away to register. Louis thanked Faye for helping him during the exam, but she told him he could have done it all on his own, then went back to teasing Ken as Miliana pulled her away. Ken turned to Louis, held out a pile of gold coins, and said it was his share. Louis was shocked to have earned that much. Ken said it was all thanks to following Louis's plan at the Berna Village Trading Company. Before that, they had gone to sell the perfume, Louis's secret weapon. He explained it was a new type of perfume he'd crafted. It was light but distinct. Ken liked the scent but worried it wouldn't sell. Louis, however, was incredibly confident, and as expected, they made a massive profit that far exceeded Ken's imagination. He said he would send part of it to his mother while wondering what in the world Louis had in his head to come up with things like this. They headed toward the registration booth. Louis asked Ken to keep this secret, and Ken agreed. Before long, a teacher gave Louis a credit card, told him to keep it safe, and wished him luck. While registering, Louis heard people whispering, calling him shameless and criticizing the school for letting commoners in. They brought up how he had defeated Faye and Shane, and that the headmaster had expelled several people because of him. Louis knew that Shees had been expelled, and Cain explained that Shees had hired an assassin's guild, so when it was discovered, he was finished. Louis finally understood that Shees had been targeting him from the start. Ken added that Shees had an older brother named Jess. He was unpredictable, so Louis had to be careful. Louis locked eyes with Jess, but he wasn't worried or angry. Jess, however, was thrilled, preparing for some real fun planning to make Louis the worst student in the Academy's history. In the Academy's grand hall, all the freshmen gathered as the headmaster welcomed them, saying they should be proud to have overcome so many difficulties to get there. But in reality, this was just the beginning. They had to keep studying and become strong, and one day they would become the pillars of the empire. Next, he announced that the freshman representative would be speaking, and that was new. He walked onto the stage with such confidence that everyone was shocked, both disgusted and curious, because he had topped the entrance exam and his bloodlust was terrifying. Yet he wasn't wearing anything. The proctors panicked and tried to stop him, but the headmaster intervened. New turned to the freshmen, called them idiots, and said his goal was to defeat them all, until they were dead. The students were furious, thinking he was too arrogant. Just because he was first didn't give him the right to say that. New told them all to shut up, and they actually did because they knew they were weak. Seeing that New was difficult to handle, the proctors worried about his future and the way he was being educated, even wanting to quit. Suddenly, New threw a hammer from the stage at someone, declaring that his true rival was that person. As the hammer dropped in front of Lewis, New jumped down like a madman, saying they were about to have a legendary battle. Ken immediately stood between the two, protecting him while panicking. He reminded New that the entrance ceremony was still ongoing and demanded he keep his distance from his friend. New mocked Ken, calling him a coward, and compared to the other nobles, called them all weak and pale. Ken got angry and was about to throw a punch, but Lewis held him back and told him to stay calm. New called them both cowards and said he didn't mind taking them both on to provoke them further. Brian came over to intervene. He said he was one of the most talented commoners and advised Ken and Lewis to get along, warning them that being selfish wouldn't help them survive in the academy. New ignored him, telling him to get lost and acting as if he didn't exist. Brian was embarrassed. Ken found it funny, but Lewis didn't understand why Brian still held his tongue and defended him. The students around them whispered, shocked that a commoner like Brian would be treated so poorly. Ken laughed with satisfaction at the sight. New was provoked and threatened to smash Brian's head in, but a teacher blocked him, reminding him that students weren't allowed to fight unless it was during class, an exam, or an official tournament. Any violation would mean immediate expulsion. New's attitude changed. He was a bit embarrassed because no one wanted to be kicked out of such a prestigious school. He backed down, postponing the fight, but the hostility toward Lewis remained. The teacher ended this entrance ceremony and announced they were off for the day and classes would start tomorrow. Lewis didn't understand why New was targeting him, while Ken tried to blame Faye and dragged her into the argument. Faye didn't take it, punched Ken, and then pointed out that the reason he had almost been expelled was partly because of her, since she had fought New in the final entrance exam. The match was a draw, but rumors said New had lost to Lewis, which made him want revenge. Faye felt relieved that Lewis was okay, and the brawl ended just fine. Lewis kept reassuring everyone it was no big deal, and that their relationship was actually pretty good, but Ken dragged Lewis away, warning him that people were staring, and he was right. The students all around them were glued to the scene. It was clear they'd been unpopular for a while now. They headed to the academy shop, where Lewis was shocked to see the prices. Everything was sky high. The shopkeeper insisted it wasn't that expensive. Take this soft feather pillow, for instance. It's only 30 silver, but for Louis, that still really hurt his wallet. She kept suggesting even pricier items, leaving Louis to just hold his forehead in frustration at how ridiculously overpriced everything was. Louis said that was still cheap, considering there were many daily necessities left, so he had to treat himself occasionally. Lewis immediately understood the power of money and credit points, so he secretly used his savings. He bought the cheapest basic living kit for 100 silver, and the shopkeeper agreed. He was happy because he had earned money from perfume earlier. Otherwise, he would have been done for. And now, intending to send the rest back to the orphanage, he noticed magic potion, something necessary for cleaning, and thought of ways to earn more money. Temporarily, he saw Faye and Miliana walking by. They were talking about returning to the dormitory, and Faye asked Miliana about tomorrow's awakening ritual. Lewis looked at the pile of bags in front of them and realized they had spent quite a lot of money. Thinking about how hard his family worked, he went to find room 600 to the dormitory, hoping not to room with a bully, when he saw someone blocking his path by throwing a futon right in front of him. He looked into the room and saw a group of boys bullying a freshman, forcing him to do their bidding. They cornered the kid, but he just looked bored. He didn't care much, even when one of them grabbed him. Suddenly, someone touched the bully's hand, making his arm shake as if shocked. Lewis warned them that causing trouble was forbidden, and asked him if he wanted to get kicked out. The bullies turned to him, arguing that they hadn't done anything wrong, except that he attacked first. One guy lunged at Lewis, but Lewis yanked his hand away, causing the punch to miss its mark. It hit his friend so hard he fell over. Lewis smirked, insisting he hadn't hit anyone, while the one who got hit cried and asked why his friend hit him. But the other guy didn't know how to answer. Lewis kicked lightly, making another guy's leg twitch and kick his friend, who was crouching down. The bully was confused. Louis punched the first guy in the chest, sending him flying into another. He still didn't understand what happened. He turned to blame Louis, but Louis just laughed and said he didn't do anything. They were hitting each other. The guy accused Louis of controlling their bodies and called him a monster, which Louis really hated. He walked closer, but the freshman who had been bullied intervened, begging Louis not to make a scene. Louis threatened the whole group and let them go. He said if they wanted to get lost, then get lost. The bullies ran away, still muttering weak threats. Afterward, Louis helped the freshman pick up his things and saw the name Reincarnates on the blanket. He tried to start a conversation, but Kara vanished immediately. Extremely shy, clearly the type to be prey for bullies. Louis looked around, seeing that the first day already had so much drama, and just hoped tomorrow's ritual wouldn't have anything crazy. Meanwhile, a few people were causing trouble in the main hall, like thorns on Louis's path. The next day at the main hall, all students and freshmen gathered for the ceremony. Louis arrived with his roommate Kara, who remained quiet as a statue, not saying a word. Louis looked at the giant statue in the middle of the hall, a statue of the goddess Gaia. A priest stood at the foot of the statue, drawing attention and introducing himself. He began to recount a long history of ancient times when the goddess Gaia created the world where humans and monsters coexisted, but then monsters used their overwhelming power to fight against humanity. Dragons ruled the skies, behemoths ruled the land, and krakens ruled the oceans. The fierce struggles between them caused the land to be stained with blood, and countless humans were wiped out. Seeing the world become like that, Gaia became angry and blessed weak humanity. Thanks to that, they began to understand the essence of the four elements: water, earth, wind, and fire. From there, they created martial arts through centuries of fierce fighting. Humanity escaped extinction and became the masters. Now the students standing in the hall were the descendants of those blessed people awakening their true power magic. Louis listened, but realized there was still no mention of the first hero the headmaster had mentioned. Meanwhile, Kara watched Louis, but stayed silent as always. Right then, the priest approached and pointed them to their seats. The two were a bit confused, but followed suit. The priest explained that those with talent would be able to feel the elements, and if they couldn't feel them, then the academy was not for them. After saying that, he turned to Louis, making him feel a bit of pressure from that gaze. The priest chased everyone out, announced that the ritual was about to begin, and asked all students to settle down. Louis was still distracted by the strange look that the priest had given him earlier. He wondered if he had accidentally offended him. The priest began the ritual by reiterating the four great elements and told the students to focus their minds, reaching out to whatever they could feel, explaining that the goddess would help them discover the elements hidden deep within. He cast magic, and symbols of the four elements appeared at the four corners of the hall, shining brilliantly and emitting waves of energy from the statues. So bright, it nearly blinded the students temporarily. Suddenly, a divine figure appeared above them, an image even more massive than that of the goddess Gaia. When they looked up, the students felt like they were drifting through the universe, surrounded by countless magical, colorful spheres, beautiful enough to take one's breath away. One by one, they were chosen by the elements. Some were as happy as if they had hit the jackpot, while others looked as miserable as if they had just lost their wallets. Suddenly, several students gasped as a terrifying whirlwind formed around one freshman. That meant someone had awakened two attributes at the same time. As everyone looked closer, they were shocked to see that person was the commoner, Nu. No one could believe he could control magic power so easily. Starting to wonder if this was a genius, Nu was overjoyed at being chosen by two elements, fire and earth, and immediately strutted around, showing off and threatening to make everyone obey him. After his display, he turned back and saw Louis still sitting in silent meditation. Nu thought that anyone who couldn't awaken an element wasn't worthy of being an opponent, but in his heart he secretly hoped Louis would succeed. Everyone else also looked at Louis, but surprisingly there wasn't a single bit of elemental energy gathering around him. They started whispering because they had expected something unusual from him. Louis was frustrated because he couldn't feel anything. He wondered if it was because he didn't belong to this world. It felt like being surrounded by a thick black screen, but he knew that wasn't right, because when he fought with Cain, he had vaguely felt a strange source of power when he used magic. Now his mind felt like it was being squeezed, as if a layer of fog was blocking his vision. Louis became angry and refused to let this damned barrier break his will so easily. Determination flared up, and his strong will released energy, pushing back that darkness. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw vibrant elements surrounding him while the priest watched from afar in utter disbelief. The matrix he had set up to cut off Lewis's mind from the outside world had been broken, and he wondered how he had done it. Lewis reached out toward the water element, but it suddenly dodged away. He could sense the element, but couldn't touch it, which only added to his confusion as he kept trying to reach it, and more. He grew frustrated with every failure. This was another trap set by the priest. He had secretly planted a confinement spell that blocked the connection between the soul and the elements along with anti-magic ore. These items weakened the bond between humans and elements, and the priest figured that even if Lewis could see them, he would never be able to interact with them. Clearly there were those around Lewis, determined to crush him at any cost. The priest blamed him for making enemies too soon for having angered them. One of them approached the priest with a small gift. To sabotage Louis, this priest accepted it, hoping he would fall into despair before the ritual ended. A while later, the students began to leave the main hall as their rituals were finished. They gossiped that Lewis was just good at putting on a show since he couldn't even awaken basic elements. Pathetic weakling, they sneered. Just then, Kara noticed something. She pointed toward Lewis and then down at the floor, giving him a warning that there was a trap there. When Lewis looked down, he realized Kara was right. He punched the rug hard, tearing it apart to reveal an orb hidden underneath. Kara turned and walked away, telling him to hurry up. Lewis smiled at her, though still confused. Why would someone do that? And was it just a coincidence or not? Glancing at the priest, he started to think it probably wasn't a coincidence. Even so, he pushed the thought aside, for now was the true moment. Lewis stood up and let the elements feel him. Suddenly, the orbs of light surrounding the students rushed toward Lewis, forming a vortex just like the one he had just created. The students didn't understand what was happening with these commoners, or why they were getting so strong so fast. The priest was stunned, wondering how Louis had awakened this power and overcome the curse. Because not even a master could break the confinement spell and the anti-magic orbs. Suddenly, someone placed a hand on his shoulder. When he turned back, he saw the headmaster looking at him furiously. He ordered him to stop and leave. The priest had no choice but to obey. As the students gathered and gossiped about why the headmaster appeared, some thought he had come to look down on the commoners who couldn't awaken their elements, while others suspected there was a secret between him and Lewis. No one knew for sure. Meanwhile, the priest was fuming, wondering why the headmaster had appeared to ruin his plan. With no other option, he left the main hall. Outside, he saw Jess waiting. The priest said the plan had failed, and warned him to stay out of sight for a while. Jess agreed and said he would handle the rest. Despite his anger, Jess was still determined to crush Lewis at any cost. Inside the hall, the headmaster quietly ordered his trusted aide, Kylie, to monitor the priest as he couldn't let outsiders disrupt the academy. With the obstacle gone, the headmaster focused all his attention on Lewis, who was still deep in meditation. As he awakened many elements, Lewis looked like he had drifted into another world, and in truth, he had, because in his mind, countless elements surrounded him, leaving him in awe. A few days ago at Ken's house, they had discussed the nature of elements. Ken explained that elements were the foundation of the world created by the goddess. Lewis had been confused because monsters were born able to use magic, so he asked why humans had to awaken first. Ken explained that monsters possessed magic crystals in their bodies. He even showed Lewis one and said these crystals contained different elemental powers, giving monsters natural compatibility with magic from birth, while humans had to go through an awakening ritual. Only when recognized by the elements could they use magic, and they had to manipulate the surrounding elements to cast spells. In the ritual, compatible elements would draw near, and once recognized, the rest was just training the body and mind. Lewis looked at the crystal and thought it was like a condensed form of the elements themselves, or that the whole world was made of elements, only humans couldn't see them. Lewis recalled that conversation, and theorized that the water element in front of him was likely the most compatible with him. As he touched it, he immediately felt everything at once, from the peaceful flow of merfolk and sirens, to the terrifying power of the Kraken. A massive amount of energy surged through his body, bringing intense pain, as if the essence of the world was manifesting through the goddess's will, and Lewis felt like he was drowning in elemental power. The sensation became overwhelming. Seeing Lewis struggling violently, the headmaster realized the situation was very dangerous. He quickly erected a goddess barrier surrounding the entire hall, creating a Gaia-level defensive layer and adding a four-cornered elemental cage to trap Lewis. As he thrashed within the storm of power, the students inside couldn't see anything because of the blinding light, but they could still feel the terrifying energy coming from Lewis. They were panicked and confused, especially when the headmaster sealed him in the barrier. The headmaster held the barrier steady and shouted for Lewis to stay calm and not let the chaos sweep him away. Lewis heard him and quickly steadied his mind. In an instant, the wild cyclone began to calm down. He wiped away a tear, realizing he had nearly lost control of his mind. As he observed more closely, he saw that the elements looked familiar, like the basic particles in his old world. If they truly functioned like particles, then adjusting their frequency could produce extremely terrifying results. When that thought appeared, one of the particles exploded and the surrounding elements began to swirl around him again. The headmaster had never seen such a sight. A giant rainbow cyclone rose up before the eyes of the students, who trembled at this terrifying power. Even the headmaster realized everything had far exceeded his predictions. Meanwhile, Lewis stood in the eye of the storm, studying the elements as if conducting a scientific experiment. He began to believe that humans could also use magic just as easily as monsters if they could control this frequency. The elements slowly flowed into his bloodstream, and Lewis thought about how fundamental particles are always in motion. If he could synchronize that movement with his breath and airflow, the elemental circulation in his body would be much smoother. If this balance could be maintained, perhaps he could even form magic crystals within his body and use high-level magic, but suddenly the remaining elements rushed toward his head. They were absorbed into his brain, and when Lewis opened his eyes again, they glowed with snowflake patterns. Simultaneously, sharp ice pillars began to form around his body. They pierced through the barrier and exploded all across the grand hall, and Lewis floated into the air as elemental power surged. Students panicked and fled as the ice spread, freezing everything in its path. The headmaster watched the students being frozen, realizing the gravity of the situation, but he knew he had to suppress the power first. He took a golden shield from his cloak. Praying for the goddess to grant the academy the power of fire, he raised the shield to the sky, causing it to shine brilliantly before summoning a fire barrier that spread throughout the entire academy. The flames reached Lewis, and upon contact, the layer of ice around him gradually dissipated, and a blinding light exploded from the hall and spread throughout the academy, visible from afar. Everyone on campus noticed the abnormal light. They were bewildered, wondering what was happening inside, while Lewis finally descended to the ground. The headmaster looked at him, wondering which element could create something like that ice. Meanwhile, Lewis remained lost in meditation. In his mind, he observed the elemental particles in his hands moving at a terrifying speed, and gradually they began to merge. Lewis calculated quickly and realized that depending on how he combined the four elements, he could create entirely new reactions, birthing something different right then and there. Wind and water within his body began to mix, but he didn't know what to do with this discovery. For now, he needed someone to guide him. As his confusion grew, Lewis realized he needed to snap out of it, and when he finally opened his eyes, he saw the headmaster standing in front of him, glancing around. Realizing a fire shield was protecting them, the headmaster lowered his hand, dispelled the barrier, and calmly asked Lewis if he understood what he had just done. "No," Lewis said, looking at the students who were nearly frozen solid, and he began to realize how serious the situation really was. Embarrassed, he gave a strained laugh, saying he had just trashed the place, and was lucky the headmaster saved them. The headmaster turned to Kylie, telling her he would take Lewis to his office while she handled the aftermath. He told Lewis to follow him and said he could ask anything on the way back to the headmaster's office, where the statue of Gaia stared at Lewis as sternly as a homeroom teacher. The headmaster congratulated him on awakening all the elements while Louis drank a tonic to steady himself, having been exhausted. Louis nodded, and afterward he manifested the elements from his hands. The headmaster was incredibly impressed, for a new student to control the elements so smoothly was simply monstrous. He could hardly believe Lewis had just awakened his talent. It was truly shocking. Then he handed him a book to study magic, telling him to read it carefully as a reference, adding that he mainly used earth and wind, so for fire and water, Louis should ask Faye and Miliana. The two girls came from noble families and were packed with knowledge. The headmaster called his student Kylie into the room, and as she entered, the magic snake turned into a beautiful woman. The headmaster introduced them to each other. He said that from now on, Kylie would be responsible for protecting Lewis. Then Kylie suggested moving somewhere else to talk more freely, leading them to an abandoned building. Louis asked why they came there. The headmaster explained that this was where he practiced and meditated, reinforced with earth magic to be super durable and soundproof. Kylie asked Lewis to show her the elements. Louis demonstrated how he accidentally awakened the ice element during the ritual. He explained that by accelerating the movement of two elements and mixing them, a new element could be born. He named it the ice element. The headmaster said he had never heard of mixing elements. Kylie was amazed, just as the headmaster said, and she was drawn to that cold smiling. Immediately after she lunged at Louis, demanding to touch the ice element, she unleashed a series of strikes, but Lewis easily defended with magic and even countered, forcing her to back away. She realized that fusing two elements was truly extraordinary. Turning to the headmaster, she asked if this had ever happened before. He replied that it had never happened since magic first appeared. Countless people had studied its power and endless geniuses had dedicated their whole lives, but no one had successfully fused elements. Most could only control one attribute, and very few could use many. Even the strongest saint of the Empire, Lady Miriam, a once-in-a-generation genius, could only control 3 elements. But she failed when trying to fuse 2, nearly going insane in both body and mind. Lewis realized that normal people couldn't fuse elements. The headmaster explained that humans must endure the elemental power in both body and mind. Accelerating the elements as Louis did required an extremely strong will to control and release them safely only when controlling multiple elements at once. Did they collide to create something new, but one could also die suddenly? Kylie realized that Louis' power could rival a saint even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Kylie decided to give Louis a serious test and summoned fire elements, lunging into battle with him again. The two clashed while Headmaster Smith explained that Lady Miriam once hypothesized that to use multiple elements at once, one needed a body like a dragon to withstand the impact, or to use magic crystals like monsters. Louis asked about the results of that research. The headmaster replied that it was a disaster. All experiments failed and the concept was strictly forbidden. He had never thought anyone could break that taboo. So seeing it with his own eyes left him extremely astonished. Louis realized he had avoided internal collision by calculating and separating the elements along their own paths. Kylie reminded him not to get cocky, warning him of the risks. Louis understood the price to pay. It could bring trouble, just like in his previous life. But he had no intention of losing control. Kylie said that if this secret got out, the consequences would be unpredictable. The headmaster assigned her to protect him, but she hated trouble, so she demanded Louis be careful. Louis agreed and identified the element. Ice is an application of water, he summoned. The headmaster asked what application meant. Louis explained that his willpower, stronger than the average person's, helped him compress water into ice under pressure, saying that he told Kylie to attack again. As she lunged, Louis simultaneously demonstrated water magic under extreme pressure. The water turned into ice, and he created an ice shield in front of him. Kylie was stunned, while Headmaster Smith was shocked at the transformation. Louis named it the super ionic ice form of the water element. Kylie asked how he turned ordinary water into ice that could both withstand her fire and radiate heat. Louis explained that liquids transform under high pressure. He said he was just applying the knowledge in his head. The headmaster turned to Louis, saying the world still had countless things yet to be explained, and invited him to come see him anytime. He promised to personally teach him how to use his power properly, and even offered him credit for every new discovery. Louis was as happy as could be upon hearing that, but Kylie was worried. She asked if the headmaster would truly protect Louis. Since what just happened was unprecedented and might just be a coincidence, the headmaster explained that some of the magic spells in the books also stem from mere coincidence, so he didn't want to rule out any possibility. Kylie listened carefully and accepted her superior's orders. She knew the main character would be a student who would require a lot of effort to look after, and that a mountain of work lay ahead, but she was still determined to do it. She vanished to handle other tasks, and the headmaster gave Louis a bottle of mental recovery potion, saying it would temporarily replenish his energy, but warned him not to overuse it. Since classes start tomorrow, he should go get some rest. Louis drank the potion and was surprised to find it actually boosted his brain power. But upon returning to the dorm, he was still wide awake, so he decided to meditate until morning. When he walked in, he saw Kara was still awake and asked what he was doing and if he was waiting for him. Louis was very appreciative and thanked him directly, knowing that Kara had saved his life today. The headmaster had once asked him about the rare artifact in the main hall and how he had recognized it. But Kara didn't answer, only handing him a business card for the Gandus Trading Company. It was then that Louis understood why Kara was so well informed. Kara left quietly, muttering a, "You're welcome," before closing the door. Louis realized Kara was just returning the favor for being saved on the first day. And as a merchant's child, he was just taking the opportunity to build a connection. The next morning at the Kandrea Training Hall, the students gathered as the new physical education instructor Derek was introduced. Derek was there to teach basic combat, but he looked quite perverted and creepy. Most of the students felt threatened or uncomfortable. Even Ken thought this teacher was weird, while Louis was struck by his excessively muscular physique, eager to learn how to train both body and mind. Derek immediately noticed Louis and moved behind him with terrifying speed. Louis sensed it instantly while Ken was spooked, and Derek leaned in close to compliment him. He praised Louis' peak physique and curriculum, expressing his desire to train him further. Louis felt both creeped out and vigilant. Then Derek turned to Ken, mocking him for being a pretty boy with no strength. Ken was annoyed, but Derek ignored him as the lesson began with the traditional academy demonstration by seniors. Several seniors, including Jess, stepped in and started badmouthing the freshmen. Even those from prestigious families were losing face as the seniors walked in full of confidence, as if this were their own backyard. Ken and Lewis felt a bit uncomfortable when Derek asked them to demonstrate their strength. A senior stepped up to the chest press machine and lifted the weights with ease. Every weight was magically reinforced, and he lifted 1 ton as if it were nothing. The students were shocked, realizing they couldn't even come close while another senior spun around with incredible speed. Someone else was running on a treadmill with weights strapped to both legs. 250 kilograms on each side. Derek told the freshmen to try, but warned them not to overexert themselves, and the freshmen struggled with every rep, clearly lacking the physical technique, while the seniors laughed until they stopped. But then they noticed someone clearing out all the workout machines. It was Lewis, who was training like he was playing a game. He lifted 10 tons effortlessly, ran so fast the machine seemed about to explode, and spun like a tornado. The students were stunned, thinking it was impossible, and suspecting he was using performance-enhancing drugs. Meanwhile, Nu was also solo ranking, and Nu was on a completely different level, pressing 15 tons like it was nothing. He ran with 20-ton blocks strapped to him as if he were just strolling in a park. The others could only watch in horror, as if witnessing a monster in human skin, and when he finished, he dropped the massive weight block right in front of Lewis. It made a earth-shattering noise. His intent to provoke was obvious, and he looked straight at Lewis, telling him to put aside the crowd and settle their score. The problem was Lewis didn't see this as a confrontation at all. He only saw Nu's inflated ego and his need to prove he was the strongest. Ironically, that thought made Lewis even more annoyed, and he rubbed his forehead, tired of how much Nu was overthinking things. Drama on the very first day, when this was just a basic physical endurance training session. Lewis remarked that showing off strength in front of everyone was meaningless and childish. But before he could finish, Jess flared up, even though Lewis hadn't been talking to him. Jess took the stray bullet personally, his face darkening as he warned Lewis not to get cocky just because he was a little bit stronger. According to him, physical strength was negligible in the long run, because true power comes from attributes. Hearing this, Lewis immediately paid attention and asked what an attribute was, and Nu replied confidently. Boasting that he possessed both fire and earth attributes, Jess was genuinely stunned the moment he heard that. A commoner awakening both fire and earth was almost unheard of, and even he understood how terrifying that combination was. Nu turned to ask what attribute Louis possessed. Lewis calmly replied that he had the water attribute, and as soon as he heard that, Jess burst into laughter, saying of all the attributes he could have chosen, he got stuck with that. Water sounded like a total failure. He openly mocked him, asking how a water user is supposed to fight by splashing water to make the opponent slip. Lewis just looked at him, completely confused as to why water was looked down upon so much. It was then that Miliana explained. She said that the water element in martial magic is considered the most basic compared to others, and the most common attack skill is the water blade. But since it leans more towards defense and support rather than destruction, people often look down on water users. Lewis stayed silent for a moment to digest the information, as he hadn't known water was despised to this extent until now. Jess continued to kick his ego even further, saying that no matter how strong his body was, once he'd awakened to water, his future was basically over. The lackeys around them erupted in laughter. Some added fuel to the fire, saying that throughout history no water type had ever reached the master level, so they advised Louis to accept his fate as a support for those with stronger attributes. According to them, the best he could do was stand in the back and buff others to win battles. Louis found it irritating to listen to, so he narrowed his eyes and asked, "So you're saying someone with only water can't transcend the master level, even under ideal conditions?" Jess replied, as if it were a matter of fact, smirking and saying that a commoner like Lewis didn't know anything about the world and needed to be enlightened. At this point, Ken couldn't take it anymore and snapped back, and Face also chimed in, demanding the others shut their mouths because they were clearly talking nonsense. The tension skyrocketed, and both sides started bickering more intensely. Jess suddenly stepped toward the teacher, mentioning that seniors must set an example, and proposed a new exercise. He said that magic control doesn't just require mana, but also a body tough enough to take a hit. According to him, training by taking hits was the perfect way to increase both physical strength and mana control, because taking a direct hit forces the body to adapt. With a sly smile, Jess proposed a friendly spar that was also endurance training, and he declared that he would personally prove just how useless the water element is. Ken quickly whispers in Louis' ear, warning him that Jess was the older brother of the guy he had humiliated earlier. Furthermore, the water element is very weak at physical enhancement, which meant Jess was planning to beat him to a pulp in front of everyone. After hearing this, Louis remained calm, turned to the teacher, and said that there is no such thing as a high or low attribute. The The teacher immediately understood that he was accepting the challenge, and Lewis confirmed it without hesitation, declaring he would face the senior himself to prove them wrong. The seniors were excited for the match to begin, and Ken tried to advise him one last time, but Lewis just said, "It's all good." The teacher announced the rules: magic could only be used in the central area, and physical training took priority. He also emphasized that dodging was forbidden. If a blow is thrown, you have to stand there and take it. As Jess and Lewis prepare, a sudden explosion of fire erupts nearby. New leaps out, his entire body engulfed in flames, laughing like a true villain. He screams that the time has finally come, and he's only now getting a real chance to fight, while the upperclassmen are immediately annoyed at being interrupted. One steps forward, scowling, and declares he'll teach New how to respect his seniors. He activates his Earth attribute, creates a thick layer of armor around his body, and lunges forward with terrifying speed. The blow was strong enough to send someone to the afterlife, but before he could even touch his target, a punch slammed straight into his face with the force of a truck. The impact shattered his defense and sent him flying across the arena. Everyone is stunned as New casually walks forward after the punch. Jess and the seniors are completely frozen, while the guy who got hit has no idea what just happened to his Earth armor. Known for being tough as nails, having it broken in one hit makes him furious and humiliated. Jess immediately orders the whole group to swarm and take New down. The seniors rush him all at once, but New looks as excited as if he'd just been buffed. He dramatically tears his shirt off, showing off a body as perfect as a statue, then laughs manically and dives into the fray. The barrage of attacks barely leaves a scratch on him, feeling like nothing more than a tickle. But every one of his counterattacks hits like a ton of bricks. He grabs an upperclassman and throws him with enough force to crash into the others behind him. For a split second, New's back is completely exposed. An Earth-type senior sees an opening and lunges, believing he's finally found New's weak spot. He attacks with all his might, but the moment the strike lands, his confidence vanishes. Instead of hurting New, he ends up shattering his own armor the moment his adrenaline wears off. The excruciating pain floods his body, causing him to scream loud enough to echo across the arena. The senior panics, finally realizing that New has been funneling his mana into a single point on his body to reinforce it to an absurd degree. He can't fathom how a freshman could possibly control mana that incredibly. Before he can even recover, New kicks him flying across the arena, smashing him straight into a wall. The teacher watches it all with a bored expression, calmly reminding them that no matter how strong you are, never forget the basics, if they don't want to end up like the senior lying on the ground. Lewis watches the carnage, getting scared, and even he has to admit New is fighting like a demon. He quietly asks Ken if New is going too far. Before Ken can answer, a surprise attack comes from behind. Ken immediately realizes the danger just as Faye and Louis spot another senior approaching from the front. Without hesitation, Ken and Faye step up to protect Louis, simultaneously wanting to prove that freshmen aren't just easy prey. As Louis stands between his two friends, he slowly lifts his eyes to look at Jess. Their gazes lock across the arena. Louis calmly says it's finally time for the real match. Jess sneers, telling Louis he's too full of himself if he thinks he's the main character. He calls him arrogant, ignorant, and unaware of his own status. Jess proudly declares himself the heir to the prestigious Harry family, and in that name, he will teach a nobody like Louis what aristocratic dignity truly is. To Jess, honor and etiquette belong only to the nobility. As soon as he finishes speaking, Jess launches himself into the air, then dives toward Louis with terrifying speed. He unleashes a gale force strike aimed straight at Louis with murderous intent. But just before the blow connects, Louis instantly creates an ice shield overhead. Jack is stunned by what happens next. Not only is the shield tough enough to block the blow without cracking, but the freezing air radiating from it is so intense that it forces him to retreat immediately. Jess looks at his hands in disbelief, realizing they are freezing just from touching the ice. He can't believe this terrifying power could come from water magic. Louis calmly confirms it's just an application of water magic techniques. Nearby, Meliana watches with deep curiosity, as even she has never seen water magic used in this way. Other students are just as clueless. No one has ever seen an ice shield or water magic controlled like that. Jess refuses to accept it, convincing himself Louis is just using some strange trick. Brian mutters that this year's batch of freshmen is full of trouble. Jess decides that no matter what tricks Louis has, he'll still teach him a final lesson. Just then, Jess looks toward New, who is still destroying the upperclassmen one by one, then immediately charges toward him. New sees Jess approaching and gets excited, thinking he's about to become the next punching bag. New throws a powerful punch, but Jess dodges smoothly and laughs, telling him he missed. New lets out a grin full of excitement for the challenge. For the next few moments, Jess is so fast that New can't land a single hit. But Jess doesn't actually want to take New down. Amidst the chaos, he secretly uses Nu as bait to get close to Lewis. Jess lunges with clear, murderous intent, but before he can reach him, Nu suddenly rushes in from the front and attacks Jess head-on. Jess dodges again, then immediately appears behind Lewis to launch another sneak attack, but Lewis puts up another ice shield and blocks it completely. He taunts Jess for always talking about honor and pride, while always playing dirty and attacking from behind. To Lewis, the aristocratic ideals Jess spouts aren't worth a dime. Jess snaps back immediately, saying that as a noble, all that matters is doing whatever it takes to win. To him, victory is destiny. Even while fighting, Jess and Lewis keep trading sharp barbs. Nu watches, getting increasingly annoyed. He suddenly jumps into the middle of the fight and attacks again. Lewis barely dodges it and looks confused since Nu is supposed to be on his side. Not to mention being forced into a one-on-two situation starts to annoy him. Jess suddenly thinks he has the advantage while Lewis is distracted. He lunges to strike again, but at the last second, Nu catches up and violently shoves him away. Jess is furious at Nu's crazy behavior after being sent flying backward. Nu shouts at him to stop looking down on him, realizing that teamwork is the smarter strategy. When Jess is shoved aside, Nu turns to Lewis with eyes burning with excitement, saying that now that the annoying noble is gone, it's finally time for the two of them to go one-on-one. The teacher observes them both closely and realizes they both follow a fighting style focused on speed, precision, and close-quarters combat. In his eyes, they are both true combat geniuses, perhaps even surpassing William. Lewis continues to dodge Nu's relentless attacks, until he suddenly grabs his arm and delivers a straight punch to the throat, Nu's critical weak spot. Nu instantly struggles to breathe and gasps for air for a moment because of the strike. Furious, he immediately snaps at Louis because hitting the throat is extremely dangerous. While Lewis is distracted for just a split second, Nu suddenly grabs his arm, his eyes flashing with rage as he realizes he's finally caught Lewis. He says he'll show Lewis what pain is now. Nu lunges forward to headbutt Louis, muttering that someone like Lewis shouldn't even have a chance to stand toe-to-toe with him, and that he was only just warming up. Lewis coldly looks back, reminding him that Academy regulations forbid intentional, serious injury. As far as he's concerned, Nu crossed the line. Right at that moment, Lewis releases the water element within his body. Instantly, water spills out all around him as his awakening power rises. Nu watches the scene with growing interest. With absolute confidence, Nu believed basic water magic was nothing. Even the instructor said this session was for physical testing, so he didn't bother dodging or backing down. Lewis remained as calm as could be in the face of that confidence. He softly asked Nu if he wanted a stronger version. The moment he finished speaking, the surrounding water instantly turned to ice, locking Nu in place. He immediately realized the excruciating pain was no joke. He frantically unleashed his fire element, desperately trying to melt the ice trapping him, and when he finally broke free, he looked even crazier than before, a wild grin spreading across his face. As he declared that fighting Lewis made him stronger, and that this match had to continue. A memory flashed one night when Nu was just a child. He knelt by a river drinking water and trying to understand the strange burning pain that always flared in his body. In the lonely darkness, he suddenly saw a pack of wolves closing in. Fear gripped him tight, but before he could even react, the pack lunged to tear him apart while he desperately fought back. Even as a child, though, one wolf bit his arm, and another sank its teeth deep into his leg. Nu possessed terrifying strength. He pried open a wolf's jaw with sheer force and ripped his arm free, his rage exploding. The overwhelming pain pushed him into a state of hysteria. And in that moment, he tore the entire pack to shreds with his bare hands that night, changed him forever as he looked at the blood-soaked wolf carcasses all around him. Nu realized that pain proved he was alive, and that strength helped him survive. The more it hurt, the stronger he became, for in this world, only the strong survive, and that child had wiped out the man-hunting pack. That is why Nu always sought out pain. To him, pain was the very definition of his existence. Back in the present, Nu lunged toward Lewis again, and as he charged, he realized something. Both of them were monsters chasing after strength. Lewis immediately countered with martial arts, focusing all his spirit and power into one technique as he landed a crushing kick straight into Nu's face. The hit landed perfectly, but instead of being stunned, Nu relished the pain which only annoyed Lewis. He attacked relentlessly, blow after blow, while Nu just grinned wide, enjoying every single strike. Cafe and Ken watched in bewilderment, fearing that at this rate Lewis might actually kill Nu. Even more terrifying was that Nu was becoming increasingly unhinged and dangerous, so realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, they decided to stop Lewis before it was too late. Nu refused to back down, shouting that the fight wasn't over yet. He rushed in again, but Lewis quickly dodged his mind, racing for a way to control this lunatic without breaking the rules. He thought perhaps freezing him solid was the only way. Louis told Nu to calm down and immediately followed up with a punch to the gut. He used an ice storm to pin Nu against the wall, but Nu unleashed his fire element to melt the ice. Watching the whole scene, the instructor finally felt real interest in his eyes. The fight was just getting fun. Nu fell to the ground but refused to accept defeat, saying that wasn't enough to satisfy him. Louis continued to give it his all, but suddenly, instead of Nu charging again, a massive force slammed him into the ground. Nu only realized what was happening when he saw Kylie standing there. She coldly stated that he had gone too far. In her eyes, Nu was nothing but an out-of-control musclehead. The instructor immediately went into fanboy mode upon seeing Kylie clearly nursing a major crush as his eyes lit up like floodlights, realizing he hadn't seen her in ages. To him, she looked even more beautiful than before. The overwhelming aura radiating from her fascinated him, but Kylie quickly extinguished his delusions and brought him back to reality, asking what he would do if a student died on the very first day. She reminded him of the headmaster's warning. The instructor blushed and hastily defended himself, insisting he wasn't the type to arrogantly abuse his power. He claimed he was just trying to unlock the student's potential through combat. Kylie sarcastically told him to pray that he was just a fool because she had special orders to protect Louis, and he should understand what that meant. After that, she announced that the headmaster wanted to see him in the office after school. The instructor immediately understood another lecture was waiting for him, yet looking back at the freshmen, he couldn't help but think about their terrifying potential, especially Louis, Faye, and Kane, who stood out significantly. He told Nu to put his clothes back on and warned him that he would let his crazy behavior slide this time, but if he lost control again, his academy points would be docked immediately. Nu barely heard a word, his mind busy calculating other things. He realized he had just survived a blow from a master-level practitioner. At the same time, he realized if he kept fighting and tearing his clothes, he would go broke sooner or later, so he decided he had to go hunt monsters to make money. Not long after the class bell rang and the instructor dismissed them, saying the upperclassmen could go home. The freshmen were to rest, recover, and take medicine together. He also warned them that from now on he would push them much harder so they should prepare themselves and not cry after class. Ken told Louis that in the Academy's 100-year history, there were almost no cases of freshmen defeating upperclassmen. Louis thought carefully because he didn't remember reading about that in the Academy documents. Ken explained that it had only happened 3 times in history, and each time several grandmasters emerged from that freshman class. Louis immediately asked when the most recent time was. Ken replied that the last time was back when their fathers were studying here, and it was said that even back in their first year, they had managed to defeat the upperclassmen. Meanwhile, the battered, bloodied, and humiliated upperclassmen dragged themselves back to class. One apologized to Jess for being too weak, but admitted that Louis and Nu were just too strong, then proposed they take them out in the shadows. Jess immediately dismissed the idea, wanting to defeat them openly and stand above everyone as the strongest, because he believed that position was rightfully his. He told them there was no need to rush, as there would be plenty of chances for revenge. In Jess's eyes, no matter how talented Louis and Nu were, they were still just commoners of the Empire, and those who held the Empire's fate were still the nobles. After that, Faye spoke with Meliana. Asking what she thought of Louis's technique, she remarked that his water magic talent was unimaginable, and suggested that if Meliana practiced with Louis, she could become stronger. Meliana silently contemplated Louis and the overwhelming power of his water magic, feeling that she could never do what he did. Even if she practiced with him, her skills were still too inferior. Before Louis appeared, no one had ever used water magic in such a strange yet powerful way. Therefore, Meliana realized she needed to create more water-based offensive techniques that suited her. Faye asked if she was pushing herself too hard at only 16 years old. Meliana softly replied that she had to do it for her family because she wanted to make them proud, and Faye already knew that answer. Once they finished, Faye called Louis over and said Meliana wanted to talk to him. As soon as she said that, everyone around them immediately turned to look at Meliana. Under those stares, she started to tremble. Everyone thought she was about to confess in front of the crowd, but that wasn't the case. Louis stepped forward and Faye explained that because he used water magic earlier, Meliana wanted to ask if he could teach her some techniques. Louis agreed immediately without a moment's hesitation. Being kind-natured, he said it was no trouble at all. Besides, since they were friends, he was more than happy to help. Hearing the word friend, Meliana suddenly felt flustered and confused. Even Louis noticed that reaction and looked puzzled. At that moment, Meliana quietly confessed that one day she might bring trouble to him, and she hoped that when that time came, he wouldn't regret being her friend. Louis said he would never regret being friends with her, because he could never regret the people he cared about. Hearing that, Meliana became even more emotional. She hurriedly said she didn't want to drag him into the troubles of her life, then suddenly ran off. Everyone watched her go with confused expressions. Faye immediately chased after her, calling out as she went to apologize to Lewis, saying she would talk to Meliana for a while to make sure she was okay. When the two were out of sight, Lewis silently thought that everyone around him was carrying their own burdens. He understood that. He even wondered if perhaps he was the one causing trouble for Meliana. He turned to Kane and asked if he knew anything about her background. Kane explained that Meliana was from the Royce family and the granddaughter of a grandmaster. When her grandmother was alive, the family was extremely prosperous and had great influence, but after she passed away, the family gradually weakened and lost their standing. Beyond that, Kane confessed he didn't know anything else, only suggesting that Faye might know more. Lewis turned to Kara to ask for more information. Kara said the Royce family had a conflict with the Mages Guild. Hearing that, Louis took immediate note and asked if Meliana's troubles were related to the guild. But Kara shook her head. That was all she knew. Lewis realized that if he wanted to know the truth sooner or later, he would have to ask Faye or Meliana directly. The next day, the freshmen gathered at the magic training grounds for their first class. A professor stood before them and declared that magic is a blessing from the goddess and the essence of the world. He said he would teach them how to control magic and use magic-infused martial arts in combat. Then he introduced himself as Professor Sid. Kane saw that Louis looked annoyed and asked about it, even though he had been very eager for the magic class earlier. Lewis admitted he was still eager, but it felt like the professor already hated him. Almost immediately, Professor Sid appeared right in front of Lewis and coldly said that students are not to talk while the teacher is lecturing. He bluntly stated that he hated rude and stupid people. Without hesitation, he deducted one of Louis' credits. He continued to mock him, saying that unlike those with muscles for brains, students must follow the rules, and if Lewis kept violating them sooner or later, he would end up with 0 credits. Not stopping there, he deducted another credit, accusing Lewis of being vulgar, even though he hadn't said a word. Louis remained silent, knowing full well he was being targeted. Before leaving, the teacher told him he should relearn aristocratic etiquette. Then Professor Sid raised a finger and a giant sand knight suddenly emerged from the ground using magic. Kane and Louis gaped at the massive structure. Professor Sid explained that in real combat magic, martial arts require mastering both martial and magical skills. To become a true apprentice, first one must learn how to shape mana into weapons, and then cover the body with magical armor. As he spoke, the teacher created a mana sword in his right hand to illustrate. He explained that mastering the basics is the only way to become a true warrior. To control mana, one must connect their thoughts with their movements and guide the mana through precise actions. After speaking, the teacher spun the sword and slashed at the Sand Knight. The strike sliced the giant structure in half, leaving the students stunned by the destructive power of magic martial arts. Afterward, the teacher said that later they would try attacking the stone statues themselves. Whoever caused the most damage would be rewarded with 5 credits. Before that, he would teach them how to attack with magic. He ordered them to split into groups by elemental affinity, while Lewis had 2 affinities, so he didn't need to join a group. Meanwhile, the water affinity students were told to stand aside to practice magic armor and support. The groups began to separate. Kane, Meliana, Faye, and Louis all went to their respective elemental areas. Immediately, a few students from other groups started mocking Meliana, calling the water affinity living punching bags. Meliana was extremely ashamed because she was once again relegated to a support role, while others got to attack the statues directly. Her frustration grew stronger and stronger. She felt that in this situation, there was no way she could reach the level of a grandmaster. Amidst the pressure and agitation, she muttered that she wanted to prove her strength to someone. Lewis heard this and wondered who that person could be, suspecting it had something to do with the Mages Guild. He asked her outright what was bothering her, but Meliana blushed and hurriedly said it was nothing important and had nothing to do with him. While preparing, Louis wondered why she was so obsessed with offensive skills. In his opinion, the water element is inherently strong in support. Both buffing teammates and disrupting enemy timing are extremely important. Meliana heard this and insisted that she wanted to become a grandmaster and restore her family's reputation, so she had to be skilled in both offense and defense. She believed that the goddess wouldn't create a useless element, meaning there must definitely be an offensive water magic technique, a powerful one somewhere. Because of that belief, she had spent many years improving her water blade with potions and developing multi-hit variations, but no matter how hard she tried, she still couldn't overcome the weakness of water magic's low damage output. Deep down, she started to fear that the water element truly couldn't reach the Grandmaster realm. Just then, another male student approached Meliana, saying it was his turn soon, so he needed to warm up with water support techniques. Meliana created a water shield around him to practice, but the continuous attacks quickly exhausted her. The repetitive pressure was clearly wearing down her body. Watching this scene, Lewis began to think deeply about the water element and the path to becoming a grandmaster. Those scenes painfully reminded him of his previous life when people always mocked him for being disabled, laughing at his research into martial arts even though he couldn't walk normally and was plagued by asthma. Many people bullied him and called him a pathetic person for pursuing a foolish dream. Some even stole his research and told him not to romanticize failure. Some even had the cruelty to tell him to just give up and die. Looking at Meliana right now, Lewis realized she understood his weaknesses perfectly, yet like Cain, she refused to give up on her dream, pushing forward regardless of what others said. This set Lewis thinking. Perhaps I can show her a completely different path for martial arts and water magic, he thought, suddenly stepping forward to manifest a powerful shield made of ice magic. The explosive force of the technique instantly sent that annoying guy flying backward. Lewis turned to Meliana, stating that he too believed in the potential of water magic, and because of that conviction, he asked if she wanted to observe his technique closely. Meliana blushed slightly as he stood near, flustered as she asked if he was serious. Louis called out to Master Sid, asking to try attacking a statue that had been bothering him. Master Sid warned him that if he couldn't cause any damage, he'd lose even more credits, and mockingly asked Lewis, "Are you planning to waste your precious ice magic on that stubborn thing?" He told him he should focus on practicing basic mana control instead. Louis calmly replied that he had just found a better way to increase the attack power of water magic. Hearing this, the entire training ground burst into laughter. The idea sounded too absurd. Even Meliana worriedly reminded him that the statue was a special artifact made of rare materials and reinforced with earth magic. Normal water magic couldn't even scratch it. She was afraid Lewis would lose more credits. Lewis just reassured her that everything was fine because he had a plan. He calmly walked up to the giant knight statue and scooped up a handful of sand. Looking at it, he remembered a saying from his old world: "Soft things can overcome hard things if you combine high-pressure water with sand." When fired at extreme speeds, it could cut through almost anything. Thinking it, he did it. Lewis immediately executed his idea. In just a split second, the giant statue was shredded into countless pieces. Master Sid stood frozen, staring at the ruins of his prized possession. Meanwhile, Lewis looked at him calmly and declared, "This is the true nature of water magic." That evening, Cain, Kara, and Lewis walked back to the dormitory, Cain excitedly recounting the day's events. He said he wished he could have seen the look on Master Sid's face when Louis earned a bunch of credits. It was a true masterpiece. Master Sid looked as miserable as if he'd seen a nightmare when he witnessed that water magic attack. It was so clean and powerful. Lewis's face had gone pale like he'd just eaten moldy bread, and he'd bolted from the classroom as soon as class ended. Louis casually replied that he was too busy experimenting at the time, so he didn't bother to look at the teacher's expression because to him it wasn't worth watching. Cain quickly pivoted back to the topic of water magic, reminding them they should consider Fai's suggestion since Meliana was trying so hard to carve her own path. She had even spent money on expensive mental recovery potions to keep training. Word was she was also planning to rent a private practice room to train in her spare time. Cain thought cooperating with her would benefit Lewis as well. Kara chimed in, saying renting a room costs about 30 silver, and the mental potions were nearly 300 gold. Hearing that, Louis was shocked. The price was way steeper than he had imagined. After thinking for a moment, he turned to Kara and asked for a favor regarding the upcoming training mission. Over the next few days, the three of them continued to discuss the mission while walking to the dorm. The next day, the teacher gathered the class on the academy grounds. He stated that their bodies were becoming stronger and more refined, which made him very proud. Then he announced they were ready to participate in an official training mission. These missions were both a responsibility and an opportunity for growth. The Khanria Academy was linked to the Mondo Great Forest on the western border. A place that was once a monster territory, it had now become a natural boundary between nations. Even today, countless monsters still lived in the forest. The deeper you went, the stronger and more dangerous they became. Conversely, the Outer Rim had much weaker monsters. The academy itself was initially built in part to defend the Empire against threats from the forest, so students were frequently sent to train by exterminating monsters on the Outer Rim. The teacher explained that every magic core collected from a fallen monster could be exchanged for points or rewards upon returning to the academy. Furthermore, the one who brought back the most would get an extremely sweet bonus, but he also warned that being too reckless would come at a price. If they were foolish enough to provoke a monster too strong for them and had to be rescued by the teacher, they would immediately lose a point to learn their lesson. Once he finished, he dismissed them to prepare for departure. Cain's eyes lit up like floodlights upon hearing this. because in his mind, this was the perfect opportunity to go all out in real combat. Meanwhile, Phi asked Lewis if he really intended to use real combat to train Meliana. Lewis calmly replied that real battles reveal one's true abilities better than simulated training. Therefore, they decided to form a 5-person team, believing that combining their strength and teamwork would be more effective than burning money on fancy practice rooms. Fei turned to Meliana to ask for her opinion, and surprisingly, she seemed extremely excited and wanted to join the team immediately. Shortly after, the teacher clapped and announced that each group of 5 freshmen would carry out their mission alongside a few seniors to learn from their experience while remaining relatively safe. Not long after, Lewis realized Jess was staring him down. Jess approached and coldly said it was quite a coincidence to meet again while preparing for the mission, then sarcastically reminded him that the mission was very dangerous and he should try not to die out there. Lewis calmly replied that only by overcoming danger do people truly become stronger. Jess clicked his tongue in annoyance and walked away, muttering that Lewis was arrogant. Once gone, Jess whispered to his friends that if a fight broke out during the mission, the seniors should absolutely not help the freshmen. At the same time, Kane quietly warned Lewis that the teachers usually only observed from afar and rarely intervened. Furthermore, some seniors might deliberately lure the freshmen deeper in to encounter strong monsters just to make it difficult for them. Lewis simply replied, "The stronger the monster, the better the magic core, and better means more money and points." Not long after, the groups of students began to enter the forest. As they went deeper, Lewis chatted with Kane about the forest, wondering if any powerful ancient creatures were still hiding there. Kane said the sages had cleared out most of the giant monsters long ago. The outer region nowadays at best would only have a few warrior-rank monsters if they were lucky. The supervising senior overheard them and secretly sneered. Warrior-rank monsters usually required many warriors working together to survive. Yet these students thought they could handle it. How naive. Suddenly, a giant monster appeared right in front of the group. Even the supervising senior was stunned because the creature before them was a warrior-rank great bear. Instead of helping immediately, the senior jumped into a nearby tree to hide, thinking to himself that his luck was too good. This monster was enough to teach the freshman a lesson from the safety of his spot. He decided to sit back and watch the tragedy unfold. Lewis, as soon as he saw the situation, felt uneasy. In his mind, a great bear was extremely dangerous. Its physical strength was immense, and its defense was as hard as concrete. This group was about to get crushed. Even so, Lewis immediately ordered the group into combat positions. As the bear let out a deafening roar, all 5 of them drew their weapons and attacked. Faye opened with a spear thrust, while Ken attacked from behind using his newly invented martial technique. But just as the strike hit the target, Ken realized the monster's body was as hard as a boulder. When the bear countered, Ken barely managed to block the blow. Immediately after, Faye charged in again while Kara attacked from a different angle. Seeing the team coordinate so well made Lewis very satisfied. Teamwork really made the difference. But the continuous chain of attacks caught the Great Bear's attention. Louis and Meliana responded. Meliana quickly used water magic to bind the bear's movements, then combined her water manipulation with martial arts moves. She hurled the giant creature away, sending it flying like a bowling ball. Lewis's eyes widened. He'd never seen a move like that. Faye explained it was Meliana's own invention, a blend of water magic with jujutsu principles. Lewis was genuinely impressed. Glad to see her developing such unique skills and unwilling to be outdone, he charged straight toward the giant bear, eager to show off his own strength. He landed a massive kick right near the beast's heart, sending the giant creature flying backward. Immediately after, he conjured a compressed water orb and fired it straight at the bear. The attack exploded violently upon impact. Before the monster even hit the ground, Emiliana stood there stunned by the sheer damage Louis had caused. Even someone with a stronger elemental affinity would have a hard time even scratching a great bear, yet he had critically injured it using only water magic. Louis calmly explained that it was all just science when water is superheated and compressed before exploding under pressure. It creates steam strong enough to cook internal organs and destroy the respiratory system. No matter how thick the hide, it's hard to withstand an attack from the inside. Miliana hung on every word as if taking in a life lesson. In her mind, she began brainstorming how she could apply these ideas to her own techniques. Afterward, Lewis unexpectedly handed her a special magic ring crafted by the Candace Trading Company, the very one he had previously asked Kara to commission. With this ring, Miliana could temporarily use earth, fire, and wind in addition to her natural water affinity, just like Lewis. The idea came to him after seeing Senior Sid wearing a whole pile of rings. He'd had a light bulb moment and intentionally prepared one for Miliana. She was visibly thrilled, but the moment she put the ring on a fire attack suddenly shot straight toward her. Lewis shouted a warning immediately. Luckily, Miliana realized it at the very last second and narrowly dodged being one-shot. Though she escaped death, she turned back with a look of pure shock. She was stunned by the terrifying power of that attack. Everyone immediately turned toward the direction it came from. The senior monitor couldn't believe his eyes. The fighter-class Great Bear had been wiped out completely as if it had never existed. At the same time, Lewis and his group felt something enormous approaching through the forest. The ancient trees around them shook violently due to the weight and aura of the creature on the move. Just then, the giant monsters emerged from the shadows. Blazer Kongs, monstrous ape-like creatures fueled by fire and a madness deep in their instincts. Ken immediately remarked that the situation was dire. Lewis quickly asked what kind of monsters they were. Ken said in a low voice that they shouldn't exist anywhere near the academy. Even one would be a crisis, let alone a whole pack. Something was definitely wrong. Not long after, the Blazer Kongs began tearing apart and eating the Great Bear right in front of them. The disgusting sight made Miliana almost vomit, while the others also had to struggle to keep their stomachs in check. At the same time, they realized other groups deep in the forest were likely in trouble. Sure enough, every group was encountering a Blazer Kong, and no one had the skill to deal with them. Panic spread fast. Everyone wanted to find a teacher immediately. On the instructor's side, the monitor was also losing his mind as casualties appeared everywhere. With no idea what was happening in the middle of all that chaos, one S-class maniac dared to stand right in front of a Blazer Kong. It was new. He laughed like a villain, looked the monster in the eye, and asked if it really wanted to fight. Looking excited, he cracked his knuckles. Elsewhere, students were running for their lives. Louis Moore thought carefully and realized that if monsters that shouldn't exist near the academy were appearing, then something much bigger had to be going on behind the scenes. Just then, the senior in the tree realized a Blazer Kong had spotted him. Panicked, he quickly coated his body in earth armor, but he was still shaking like a leaf. Before he could do anything else, the Blazer Kong threw a punch so strong it nearly crushed his body. As the monster prepared to stomp him to death, Lewis suddenly appeared, kicking the Blazer Kong square in the face and sending the giant beast flying back. Without hesitation, Lewis ordered Kara and Miliana to pull the injured senior away and retreat. They obeyed immediately, though they ran while begging Lewis to come with them. He told them not to worry, he'd catch up in a second. The Blazer Kong that Lewis kicked was even more furious, its humiliation turning into pure rage. It opened its mouth and fired a giant fireball at the group. Lewis immediately shouted for everyone to dodge and find cover. The fire was so intense that even Miliana and Kara only barely survived. Faye realized the Blazer Kong was intentionally trying to kill them, not just attacking wildly. Ken understood that the only way to survive now was to fight together. Using wind magic to boost his speed, Ken lunged toward the Blazer Kong with terrifying speed and slashed it with his daggers. Even though it only caused minor injuries, the attack was effective. At the same time, Faye rushed in with her spear, stabbing the monster in the arm, and then following up to force it to the ground. Kine watched, amazed by her strength. Faye immediately linked her moves, activating Holy Spear Arts and unleashing Moonfall. She unleashed a whirlwind aimed straight at the Blazer Kong's heart. It looked like a direct hit, but the monster suddenly opened its eyes. Faye panicked, realizing it had used crystal magic to reinforce itself. Refusing to stop, she continued attacking with her holy spear, piercing its body and triggering a violent explosion. Standing over the monster's remains, she had just enough time to feel proud of taking it down when Kane and shouted at her not to let her guard down. Just as Faye turned, she saw the Blazer Kong standing tall right over her. Even after she'd blasted it with everything she had, the monster opened its mouth and unleashed a blast of destructive fire straight at her. At the very last moment, Lewis lunged in front, raising an ice shield to protect them both. Immediately after, he created a series of giant ice lances that erupted from the ground, encasing the Blazer Kong in layer after layer of ice. For the first time in a while, the group had a few seconds to catch their breath. They had to thank Lewis, but they still couldn't understand how the monster was still alive. Even though its heart had been pierced, Lewis didn't seem to hear them. His eyes were glued to the monster. He quickly realized it was preparing to unleash another fire breath. Without hesitation, he pulled Faye away again. Just as the Blazer Kong shattered the ice and broke free, more horrifyingly, the wounds caused by Kane and Faye began to heal almost instantly. The group was left speechless. They knew Blazer Kongs were aggressive, but they'd never heard of them healing like this. It was like a game glitch, watching it heal. Lewis suddenly realized this behavior was exactly like Nu's. Just like Nu, the monster seemed to grow stronger from pain and battle. Elsewhere in the forest, a teacher was soloing several blazer kongs at once, becoming increasingly frustrated. No matter how many times he hit them, they just healed and got stronger. He realized something was terribly wrong, and if this continued, the students in the forest would be slaughtered. Back on the battlefield, Lewis also understood how bad the situation was. As more and more blazer kongs surrounded the group from all sides, Miliana and Kara tried to defend themselves, but were still injured. Nearby, the injured senior finally regained consciousness. Instead of panicking, he wore a sinister smile. Everything was going according to plan. His mission was complete. Now he just had to let these glitched monsters finish off Louis and the rest of the commoners. The horrifying truth was revealed. It was all the seniors' plan from the start. Meanwhile, right in front of Lewis the Blazer, Kongs became even more insane. Ken couldn't believe it. See, when he saw them using martial arts and magic armor like real warriors. As the monsters attacked, Louis struggled to defend himself in the chaos. He realized the terrifying truth. They were zeroing in on him. Suddenly, one of the monkeys conjured a giant fireball the size of a mini-sun, aiming straight for Lewis, while all the other Blazer Kongs launched their own fireballs simultaneously. Faye and Ken lunged forward instantly, trying to shield Lewis. A split second later, a terrifying explosion ripped through the forest as powerful as a miniature nuclear bomb. Watching from afar, the senior smiled with satisfaction, believing the mission was a success. But Lewis wasn't the type to just get wiped out so easily. Amidst the blast, brilliant blue rays burst from within the sea of fire, even making the Blazer Kongs freeze in confusion as they stared at the strange light. A few seconds later, a violent vortex rose up, sweeping away the surrounding sea of fire. Faye and Ken immediately recognized that blue energy source, and they realized instantly that Lewis had survived the most terrifying attack ever unleashed upon a freshman. Not only was he alive, but he emerged in a state even more fearsome than before. Faye exclaimed in awe at his ability to control mana on such a massive scale and with such sheer willpower. Only a master-level elite could pull that off. Ken finally understood that Lewis had been hiding his true power all along. Lewis himself felt the pressure tearing his body apart. By accelerating his mana circulation, he was temporarily forcing himself to reach a level of control equal to a master, but the cost was excruciating pain, and he knew he was reaching his limit. So he decided to end this fight quickly. With that in mind, he activated a breathing technique, combined his ice abilities, and summoned a massive tidal wave around him. The waves surged out, swallowing the Blazer Kongs, causing them to panic. In the very next moment, the entire body of water instantly froze into countless razor-sharp shards of ice. Lewis took one step, and the entire battlefield turned into ice, helping him accelerate to a terrifying speed. He dashed toward one monkey and landed a blow so powerful it sent it flying into the air. Another attacked immediately, but Lewis easily defended himself with his acceleration technique. Then, he counterattacked both at once. His speed was so fast that the monsters couldn't keep up. He would appear beside them one moment, then vanish and strike from another direction. However, Lewis wasn't just fighting wildly. While moving, he secretly created a massive 8 trigrams formation on the ground. With each point holding a Blazer Kong, he used his ice ability to lock all the monsters in place. Then he soared into the sky and unleashed a rapid-fire barrage, forcing all the monsters deeper into the ice trap, locking them down so tightly they couldn't escape. Once the structure was complete, Lewis landed back on the ground. He silently gazed at the work of art he had just created. Suddenly, cracks began to spread across the giant ice prison, and seconds later, the entire structure shattered. All the Blazer Kongs inside exploded into countless pieces like broken building blocks. Watching from afar, the masked senior was trembling with rage. There was no doubt about it. Lewis had won again against all odds. Meanwhile, Ken and Faye were frozen in shock, seeing Lewis wipe out the entire pack of Blazer Kongs almost instantly. As the battle ended, Louis noticed something strange. His wind and water mana were reacting to him more smoothly than before, as if control was becoming easier. Upon touching the ground, Ken congratulated him, admitting he never thought ice techniques could be that overpowered. Faye immediately cut in, telling the two of them to stop with the starry-eyed look, because they still had to run before getting ambushed again. Lewis agreed, immediately realizing it was the perfect time to retreat since the teachers had finally decided to intervene directly, not far away. The senior secretly watched the reinforcements arriving and realized his plan could no longer continue. Thinking fast, he punched himself in the chest hard enough to wound himself, then collapsed, pretending to be a pitiful victim. not long after the principal arrived on the scene in person, ordering all teachers to prioritize protecting the students and wiping out the monsters. The group was stunned to see the principal heading into battle himself. The principal immediately approached and asked if Lewis and his group were okay. Ken quickly explained that they survived entirely because of Lewis. Faye added that Louis had single-handedly taken down several master-level Blazer Kongs. Without him, they would have been wiped out. Hearing this, even the principal looked puzzled, as taking down monsters of that level alone was an incredibly extreme feat. However, Lewis said that the whole incident felt very wrong. He handed the principal an ice shard containing a Blazer Kong carcass. After examining it, the principal immediately told them to return to the academy while he handled the rest himself. Afterward, Lewis dropped by the academy market and went into a shop. The owner said that after the mission he had accumulated a pile of academy points, but she was also puzzled why he was buying so many mental recovery potions, warning him that overdosing would be harmful to his body. Lewis calmly said he knew the risks.